Here we go.
You really think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy?
Hey, motherfucker. What do you like to do?
Oh, I don't know. Play chess. Screw.
Well, let's play chess.
They give off to Jonathan Taylor. Jump cutting his way. Close to the goal line. He's in there. Touchdown. I-N-D-Y. Jonathan Taylor.
Wheeler finds Quan from the logo.
Here's Halliburton into the front court. Mishandled it, but gets a shot. Hits it! Hits it!
John, I have never been better to be on the air with you here in Indianapolis, a place where so many of my dreams have come true.
The Ride with JMV on 93.5 and 107.5. The Fan.
Welcome in. Happy Wednesday. Hope you're having a great day on this frigid day. At least it's a bright day, especially a bright day if you're an IU fan. Got a bright month if you're an IU fan right now. Maybe not so much if you are a Purdue fan. It's The Ride with JMV here on 93.5, 107.5 The Fan. I'm Derek Schultz filling in. John returns tomorrow, so I get to hop on the bike, as I say, and ride it for the next couple of hours, taking you up until Pacers and Bulls pregame coverage right here on The Fan. And we've got a lot to get into today, which is nice because generally speaking, sometimes like around this time of year, you know, the Colts have been out of it for a long time, which is essentially what the Colts do now. It feels normal, sadly, for the Colts not to be involved in certainly the Super Bowl, but even the NFL playoffs. And in a way, that's almost as depressing as this weather is, that has become so normal. But with right in the heat of the Big Ten season when it comes to college basketball, and we've got the Pro Football Hall of Fame talk, including the Bill Belichick news from yesterday, which has relevance to Indianapolis because of some of the reasoning why he was left out. We'll talk about that coming up later on today. But looking really forward to kind of jumping into a myriad of topics today, starting with Indiana and Purdue, because that still is the biggest rivalry in this state. And I think last night, while it was one of whatever it's going to be, 35 games, 35 games that these two teams are going to play, this felt like sort of a season crossroads for both IU and Purdue simultaneously. Now, we can't really necessarily align the narratives for both of those teams completely because Purdue was a preseason number one. Indiana had just replaced their head coach for the umpteenth time this century and had built basically a team from scratch. So they're operating from different starting points this season. But I think last night's game in a lot of ways was a crossroads for both teams. It was a crossroads for Indiana in the sense that, you know, here's an IU team that I think most people would agree has been competitive and probably more watchable than you thought. You know, think about not just the fact that they had been losing, but think about sitting down to watch Indiana men's basketball play the last couple of years. Now I'm talking post the Trace Jackson, Davis, Miller, Kopp, Jalen Hood-Schifino team. That was a fun team, right? 4 seed, second place in the Big Ten, the whole deal like that. That was a good team. That was a fun team, good whole deal. I'm talking about like the last couple of Mike Woodson teams. It was such a chore to watch them play basketball. You know, especially last year's team. Like there was no, outside of maybe Trey Galloway and I guess with Anthony Leal and the hometown kid, there was no like emotional connective tissue in between you watching at home and that team. It was a team essentially of mercenaries, right? And I'm not trying to be harsh, like that's college basketball today. So whatever, that's not me being like old guy, NIL, blah, blah, blah. That's just what it is. That's what a lot of these guys are now for these teams. And not only that, did you not have the emotional connection? They just played bad basketball. It was boring. It was outdated. It was antiquated. And they just weren't any good. And not that this team is great. And not that this team has the emotional connective tissue, because I think if you stop most IU basketball fans before last night and you said, hey, man, name 5 players that play for IU right now. Hey, man, who's Nick Dorn? I think most people would not be able to answer that question, right? But still, you watch this group and they can shoot the ball really well, which inherently is fun to watch teams that shoot well from three-point range, especially. They play a more engaging style. And last night you saw them really look like a cohesive unit for 40 minutes. And that was there were some breaks in there too. There were some bad stretches for Indiana, but that looked like a team that was not just thrown together. Whereas the last couple of Indiana teams have felt like they were just sort of thrown together. You roll the ball out there, everybody's on their own, and there's no plan. And the plan that is the plan from like 1982 basketball. And you're just like, what am I watching here? So I think last night was a bit of a reintroduction for Indiana fans with Indiana men's basketball again, especially with football doing what they did, because you just didn't have to pay attention to them getting their doors blown off by Iowa or not beating a team with a pulse up until last night. You got to kind of ignore all of that stuff. So then if you jump back in last night, you thought to yourself, hey, like this is great. They beat Purdue, the most hated rival. They look good doing so. It's fun style of basketball. Assembly Hall was popping, which has also been more and more rare lately. And so you had all of these good things happen. And now, Indiana looks like they're on a trajectory to make a real push for the NCAA tournament. And I know some of you at home, especially the longtime Indiana fans, and we're all kind of exhausted by those types of people, right? The five banners people, like, well, like the NCAA tournament, who cares? The standard Indiana should be to make the championship. Okay. Indiana hasn't made the championship in a really long time. Indiana's been past the Sweet 16 once since I was in 5th grade, and I turned 43 next month. So, I understand what the standard was. That's not the standard now. If Indiana could get into the NCAA tournament with Darren DeVries in his first year, that's great. That's a great step in the right direction from where the program has been. They've missed 6 out of the last 8 tournaments. I'm not even counting the COVID year. Count COVID, it's 7 out of the last 9. And one of those ones that they made it, they were in a first 4 game in Dayton. So they got in by the skin of their teeth. So yes, Indiana having an NCAA tournament caliber resume, thanks to a win from Purdue and some strong metrics, and maybe they can stack some more wins on there, and maybe Nick Dorn gets going, and maybe Tucker DeVries finds his shot, and maybe Lamar Wilkerson keeps being Lamar. All those things are great things for Indiana. If Indiana's in the 7-10 games, sign me up. Wonderful, that'd be great. And then you look at it from the Purdue standpoint, a crossroads for them. You come in with a bad week, and you don't want to overreact to a bad week. You had UCLA, you had that game in the bag, right? You're up 6 points with 90 seconds left. You got to win. You got 3 seniors that have played 10,000 games at Purdue, and Kaufman, Wren, and Lawyer and Smith. You got to win that game. And they don't. And then they play Illinois, and they play really well offensively. They play really poorly defensively. And Wagler goes off. He scores 46 points. Oh, my God, in a college basketball game. It was just incredible. One of the most incredible performances ever, if not the best, ever in Mackey Arena. And so, glass half full, you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, maybe it was just a bad week, right? And then last night, these same issues pop up where they're not defending the three-point line, and they're lacking cohesion, and the offense is a little bit scattershot, and they're not rebounding the basketball the way that they should, and they're not playing as hard as they should. I mean, for a long time, they had play hard on their shorts, and it just you're not seeing it for 40 minutes, even to the point where Matt Painter was calling it out last night. So a crossroads for Purdue in the sense that not that their season is over from losing to IU, but now a 3-game losing skid, I think that takes you off the table for the Big Ten title. And now you're just not wanting this to avalanche on you any more than it already is, because this league is really good at the top. The bottom of the, Maryland and some of those, they're really bad, right? But you're going to have that when you have 18 teams now in the league. You're going to have some bad ones, but you got some really good ones at the top, like Nebraska, Michigan, Michigan State, and Illinois. Any of those teams could be a Final Four team. Any of those teams could be a champion. And if you still feel that way about Purdue, you can still feel that way about Purdue. But for a team that was the preseason number 1 on January 28th to be, objectively speaking, the 5th best team in the Big Ten, that's problematic. That's an issue. Because for Purdue, if they finish 3rd in the Big Ten and lose in the Sweet 16, the season's a failure. The season's a failure. That's not what you can't have last season, this season. Last season, they were a little bit, not a plucky underdog story, but, they lose Zach Edey. They were expected to take a step back. They took a step back. But they squeezed by the end of the year, and they went through a slump themselves. They squeezed enough juice out of that team for you to say, you know what, I'm okay with where they got. Pushing the number 1 seed Houston to the limit in Indianapolis in the Sweet 16, fine. I think that was a perfectly defensible level season for Purdue. But for Purdue, you're kind of at the point where if you don't get to Indy again, which is the side of the Final Four, the season is a disappointment. And that's actually a really good place for the program to be. That's where everybody wants to be. Hell, that's where Indiana wants to be, right? Even coming off that win last night. That's where they want the standard to be. But that puts a lot of pressure on Purdue to get this thing right, because you don't have this group any longer. You don't have this situation with 3 guys that have been through all of the critical games that Braden Smith, Fletcher Loyer, and Trey Kaufman-Renn have been through. And maybe that gives you some confidence moving forward here, is that they're going to be able to figure it out because you have those 3 and then you have Matt Painter, who have navigated these things before. But these things can tailspin too. They don't even have to tailspin. They can just devolve to the point where you miss the bar and then you don't get a chance to cross the bar again. I mean, look at Texas football this year. They were the preseason number 1, right? They ended up 10-3, didn't they? Did they win their bowl game? I don't pay attention to the bowls. They aren't the college, but they were in the Mayo Bowl. They're in some bowl, and they won that game. But 10-3 at Texas, like for most teams, yeah, it's a pretty good season. For them, no. You're number 1. You got Arch Manning. Like you got to be better than that. And that's where Purdue finds themselves too. But I do think that it's especially last night's loss to Indiana is disappointing because you felt like they got outfought. And you usually don't say that about a Purdue teams. Even Purdue teams that are lesser ones than this one, you usually don't say that they got outfought, and it felt like they got outfought last night. So, I don't want to drop all the usual cliches. Well, they got to take a long look in the mirror when they come back. But it is true. This is a crossroads point. This is I think I said last night on X Twitter that it was a crisis point. And some people were like, crisis? What is this guy talking about? I know he works for Purdue now, but he's an IU grad. He's showing his true. People are going to be that way on the internet, right? But seriously, it is a critical point because, yes, there is a lot of season to go. The book has not been written on Purdue. And in all honesty, as much as I know Matt Painter and the program, they value Big Ten regular season championships, this season, whether it's a success or failure, will be based on what Purdue does in March. Not in February against Maryland and not in January against IU and UCLA. That's not what ultimately this team is going to be remembered and judged upon. But that said, this is a big moment for them where the season can go kind of one way or the other. And after last night, it looks like Indiana season's kind of going like this. If you're watching at home on YouTube, I'm doing the airplane taking off thing. And Purdue season looks like it's kind of going like this, where I'm doing the airplane, crashing thing. I don't know, James, am I doing a good job with the hand motion? I don't know. You have all new stuff in here. This is nice. The new I've not been in this building to fill in. I was used to the downtown building, and you got these fancy tables, and the seats are real comfortable, and the microphones. We got the cameras on a tripod, which is really cool. You guys have really went and found yourselves here on this show.
I'd say the biggest improvement is that there's an actual window that we can see outside of.
Yeah, that's nice too. You just kind of felt like you were a little bit in the pit of despair in that windowless room. For sure. No, that's a good observation there. So Indiana beats Purdue 72-67, their first quad one win. And in nerd speak, quad one, let me think. I think off the top of my head, I think it's 1 through 15 on home games. So teams, if you beat a team ranked 1 through 15 in net, so the NCAA ratings, I know I'm getting heavily into the nerdom here. At home, that's a quad one, or on a neutral court, it's 1 to 25, and I think away it's 1 to 50. It might be 1 to 40. So that would qualify as a quad one win. So that's Indiana's first quad one win. And in fact, they only have one other quad two win, and that was at home against Washington, who, let's face it, Washington's not going to be an NCAA tournament team. So clearly Indiana's best win, and that's ultimately what it's about. Indiana has good metrics, but what it's about when it comes to making the NCAA tournament is who'd you beat? Who'd you beat? Who'd you lose to? And Indiana, thankfully, outside of the loss to Minnesota, which isn't that bad of a loss. Teams have quad 2 losses. It's not that big of a deal. But outside of the loss to Minnesota, have really avoided that. They don't have a quad 3 or quad 4 loss. This was their first real quality win. This was their first win over somebody that is I know some of the Purdue fan friends in my life, Todd Meyer down the hall thinks that they're just going to lose every game that they play from now on. I know he's listening right now. Purdue's going to be an NCAA tournament team. So that win will still hold up, I think, for Indiana. It might not always be a quad 1 win, but I think it will hold up for them, and it's something to build on moving forward, especially with this trip coming up to Los Angeles where they got to go at UCLA, at USC, and that's a difficult trip because both those teams are good and they're athletic, and it's just difficult to go to the opposite coast like this when you're used to going as far away as like Lincoln or Minneapolis. It's a whole different ball of wax to have to go and do that trip. Whereas Purdue now, even though the finishing stretch isn't that difficult, they only get Nebraska once. They only have Illinois once, so you don't have to go to Champaign. There's no return game there. You only get Michigan once. You only get Michigan State once. This schedule was made for them to contend in the Big Ten. They got to go at Maryland, who's terrible. I mean, if you lose that game, then you really sound the alarm bells. Same for Oregon, who stinks. So they have 2 games against back-to-back, Maryland and Oregon, Sunday and then next Saturday in between a week off. So, a good time to find themselves before you really have to kind of hit the home stretch here. At Nebraska, at Iowa, Michigan, the return game against IU, and then Michigan State. Really difficult kind of closing kick there until you get to March for Purdue. But we'll see if they can survive that, because they're just going to have to. They're going to have to find answers. I thought they'd be able to lean into their experience. They got a lot bigger. Oscar Clough allowed them to not be dominated on the glass all the time like they were last year, but you still kind of see the ugly things rear up when you pull him away from the basket. And you saw what Illinois did on the offensive glass at Mackey Arena. And even you saw what Indiana did last night. Indiana got out-rebounded, but they didn't get out-rebounded to the margin that they should have, because when you look on paper at the size disadvantage that they had there, I think Indiana actually held themselves up pretty well. I think Reed Bailey actually played pretty well. Connor Enright was fantastic last night. I mean, we already mentioned Nick Dorn, but Connor Enright on both ends was fantastic. I mean, anytime Connor Enright makes a 3, it's like found money. And he made 2 really big ones. He made one going into right after halftime to extend the lead to 14, and then he had the kill shot last night, really. The clincher in the final minute to push that 2-point lead to 5 when things were really starting to teeter there for IU. But that's what Purdue needs. They need those other guys to step up. I mean, Trey Kaufman-Wren had a nice game last night. Braden Smith is his usual self. He's had a fantastic season, but Fletcher Lawyer's a senior now who's played a ton of basketball, and we can't, be having this, okay, he's 1 for 6 from the field with 4 points, and then he's a defensive liability on the other end. Like, you can't have that. You can't have that from one of your seniors and one of your key players. You need CJ Cox to consistently hit and Jakari Harris to consistently hit big shots. You need Jack Benter to contribute off the bench. You need Daniel Jacobson to do something. You need all those guys collectively. It can't just be about the top 3. But even the top 3, it's been, Kaufman-Wren offensively, and some of that is touches and things like that. But, getting him more involved, and then the Lawyer's just been all over the place. They need to get him dialed in, because I'm convinced, like, if this team is going to do what people thought they were going to do going into the season, and people thought they were the preseason number 1 team going into the season, then they need to get Fletcher Lawyer going. Or else it's going to be like a Sweet 16 team. I mean, this is a tough year. This is a tough year to be very good and not great, because there are just a ton of very, very good basketball teams. I mean, there's probably 12 teams right now that can win the whole thing. And that's not always what you would say. I mean, you got 5 of them in the Big Ten, for God's sake. Maybe just 4. I don't know. We'll see where Purdue kind of goes from here when it comes to that. Other things to touch on today besides college basketball, we'll get into the Bill Belichick snub. In fact, we'll do that in the next segment of the show. But speaking of the NFL, visit Indy and Chris Gall. A lot of people know Chris Gall, one of the great leaders in this city. I saw a report a couple of days ago in the Indianapolis Business Journal that Chris Gall was mentioning when the NFL execs are here for the Combine, that the folks that visit Indy, along with Sports Corps and the Capital Improvement Board, are going to take them around to show them some potential sites to hosting the NFL draft here in Indianapolis, which I think would be really cool. So we're going to talk to, I was actually texting with Chris about this last time, but we're going to talk to Patrick Talty, who is the president of Indiana Sports Corps, just a little bit about that process. And, I find the whole thing sort of fascinating. Like, I think we take for granted that all these events just come to Indianapolis. And I do think that there is a reputation aspect to it, that the event, Indy's gotten to the point where the event seeks out the venue, right? Because the organizers, I would say I have nothing to do with it. The organizers here are really smart, and they know what they're doing, and the volunteers and just the city people, residents of Central Indiana, just activate and do a great job supporting these events. And I think the secret is out about that, especially in the wake of the Super Bowl, whatever that was, 15 years ago. But there is also like what Patrick does, what Chris does, and what all these hundreds and thousands of people do, is that there is this process to recruiting not only these sporting events, but conventions and all kinds of things to Indianapolis, and then keeping them here. And we'll get a little peek behind the curtain with Patrick Talty coming up at 5 o'clock to talk a little bit about that and the potential of hosting the NFL draft. And we'll talk combine and maybe some of those other things too. They got the men's Final Four, of course, coming up here in a couple of months and prepping up for that. Kevin Bowen will join us at 4 o'clock for his usual spot with JMV, except it'll be with me this time. And we'll talk a little bit Colts offseason. I'll be totally honest with you guys. I'm not real interested in talking about the Colts in late January after 6 or 8 months of talking about the Colts. But we will get into some of the storylines involving the Colts there, and then talk about Belichick and some of those other things too. And then Galen Clavio from Crimson Cast. It is the longest running IU sports podcast. But the reason that I'm having him on is not just because, IU just had a big win in basketball, but because, that very much has been an IU football show. And that's been an IU football show even when IU was like a 3-9, 2-10 team. And Galen and Scott do an awesome job with that show, and he's going to join us to talk about IU football's ride, what it means, the sustainability of the whole thing. Kurt Signetti already turning to chapter number 3 in year 3. And then also the sustainability of last night's win over Purdue and what it could mean here moving forward. And then your phone calls as well, 239-1070. James Adams is here on the ones and twos. I'm Derek Schultz filling in for John, and we got plenty more to get to with the ride with JMV. Next, we'll talk Bill Belichick, one of the most hated figures in Indianapolis sports history, but did he actually get jobbed? We'll discuss when the ride returns next on The Fan.
The Ride with JMV.
Son, you got a panty on your head. Just drive fast, eh?
93.5 and 107.5. The Fan.
Thanks so much for making us a part of your Wednesday. It's The Ride with JMV on The Fan. I'm Derek Schultz filling in. John returns tomorrow. Happy to be with you. Spent the first segment talking college hoops, IU and Purdue mainly, and we'll get back into that sporadically throughout the show. But I was making dinner last night, and I don't know. I'm sure a lot of people in our listening audience has young kids, and the issue with snow days is that it just sort of throws a wrench into everything, right? And that's kind of what my existence was the last couple of days. I have a soon-to-be 9-year-old who is in 3rd grade who's awesome, and his name's James. And I also have a wife who works at a hospital here in the city and does the graveyard shift, overnight shift. And so just inherently that kind of complicates my schedule. But then you have, a snow day where it's just, your son's there and I don't want to just park him in front of a screen, but I still have work to do and I have a job and I have job things and job responsibilities and all of that. So you're trying to kind of juggle all those things at once. So I'm like half helping him with his e-learning, half making dinner, half doing the whole deal last night. And it comes across the screen that Bill Belichick is not going to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And I'm thinking to myself, am I just hallucinating because of the last, 17 days of snow days and e-learning? Or am I seeing this correctly? And it is true. Bill Belichick did not get the 40 votes necessary out of the 50-member panel. And so that'd be at least, 11 votes. 11 people would have to say no for that to happen. Not 1, not 2, not 4, not 6, but 11. And from being an Indianapolis resident for the last 20 years, I fully understand Bill Belichick's standing here in this town. I think if you were to take Tom Brady out of the question and you ask most people, hey, which sports figure do you hate the most? I think he'd be number 2. And I don't know if it'd be really even close. I think it's those two by far. And then there's a big gap. There's probably a gap between Brady and Belichick, but, Brady 1, gap, Belichick 2, gap. I think that's where we are with it. But regardless of how you feel about him as a person and as a rival and the whole thing, the guy won 8 Super Bowls. 6 as the head coach of the Patriots, 2 as a coordinator with the Giants, where he did an unbelievable job. I mean, on paper, the 1990 Giants should not have beaten the 1990 Buffalo Bills, and they did. And Bill Belichick had a ton to do with that. I know Parcells gets the flowers because, Bill Parcells is the head coach. That's how it works. But Bill Belichick was a huge reason to why Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, Andre Reed, et cetera, did not win that Super Bowl. And what I can't stand about the Hall of Fame process, I am not somebody that is distinguished enough or was ever distinguished enough in the media to be allowed to vote on anything. But what I can't stand about that process is that a lot of those people that I guess would be former colleagues of mine back when I was a sports media guy feel like they need to make the process about themselves. From my standpoint, if I am a Hall of Fame voter, I am a steward for the Hall. I am thinking about them, not me. I'm thinking about the people that walk through the door and what they see, the bronze busts or the plaques in Cooperstown, or I don't even know what they have in Springfield. It's been so long since I've been in there. That's who I'm thinking about. That my responsibility is towards them, not to and to the sport really, and not to myself and my feelings. So if I don't like somebody, they hurt my feelings, or they treated me poorly. Look, we're all human, right? That human nature. Like I like this guy, I don't like this guy, whatever. Like that creeps in. Whether you try to block it out or not, like part of that creeps in. But if people are in their feelings about Bill Belichick and that's the reason why he didn't get in, that's embarrassing. Then you should really just you're too emotionally fragile to vote. If that's the case. But there's a different case that's being kind of laid out here, and that is that because of Spygate and Deflategate and all the gates, there was a contingent of voters that felt like they wanted to not have Bill Belichick get in on the first ballot, which is, the fact that we've made this first ballot thing, the Hall of Fame is a Hall of Fame. If you go into the Baseball Hall of Fame, Babe Ruth is in the same room as Harold Baines. Babe Ruth was 500 million times the player that Harold Baines was, but they are in the same room. They are both Hall of Famers. That's how it works. This first ballot thing, who cares? Why? Again, that is another area where the voters made the process about them. And it's just a really selfish way to approach it, in my opinion. But I don't want to get off on the whole first ballot thing. But voters felt like, because of the cheating or whatever. And reportedly, one of the ringleaders that rallied the troops against putting Belichick in on the first ballot was the all-time petty Bill Polian. We all know about Polian and the rivalry with the Patriots and how he felt about Spygate and Deflategate and all of those different things, even though I guess he wasn't even here for Deflategate, right? But he talked about it on TV, and he was probably PO'd about it just because the Patriots had the reputation for doing stuff like that. Now, Polian categorically denies, that is a direct quote, involvement in getting people to vote against Belichick. But he had a strange statement to ESPN where he said he couldn't remember if he voted for him or not. Dude, how is that? How is that possible? Whether you voted for him or not. Oh man, did I put Bill Belichick in the Hall of Fame? I don't know. God, what was I doing that day? I picked up groceries and then let's see, I was in the room and I got a sandwich and I don't know if I remember. Of course you remember whether you voted for him or not. So that's what kind of raised the alarm bells a little bit for me. And some fans like that. I've got an old buddy, Nate Dunleavy, used to do the site, 18to88.com. That's an extremely deep cut, but 20 years ago, when the blogs were really kicking, 18 to 88 was one of the Colts blogs that I read. 18 to 88 being, of course, Manning to Harrison. I mean, this is how long ago this blog was. And he was tweeting last night about it. Oh, I think it's great because, Polian's petty. I don't know, man. The way that I look at it, I think it's kind of embarrassing. I think it's kind of embarrassing that we have to punish somebody or slap them on the wrist for Spygate or whatever happened. Bill Belichick will be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, right? So why delay that process? Why delay something that is a fait accompli? This is happening. He's going to be in your hall. So what are we doing? What's it say about your sport when you're gatekeeping it to the point where a guy that won 8 championships does not get in? And yes, Spygate happened, right? They found out, they got punished for it. Deflategate, who knows? I still don't know. Even 10 years later, I don't know how I feel about Deflategate. I wish that I had. I probably should have a take on that, right? I don't know if that was an advantage, if it was disadvantage, if it was just a thing that was a nothing burger that was blown completely out of proportion, or if it was some just, deep level conspiracy. I have no idea. But punishing them for stuff like that, I mean, the guy is a Hall of Famer and one of the best to ever do it in the sport. And the same can be said for Tom Brady, who was part of all those teams. Are we going to make Tom Brady wait after the first ballot? The Tom Brady? You going to do that because we're petty or whatever else? Speaking of Brady, he had this to say, a quote, "I was with him every day," meaning Belichick. "If he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer, there's no coach that should ever be a first ballot Hall of Famer," which is completely ridiculous because people deserve it. He's incredible. There's no coach I'd rather play for. If I'm picking one coach to go out there and win a Super Bowl, giving me one season, I'm taking Bill Belichick. So that's enough said. Yeah, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. So the Pro Football Hall of Fame with this whole waiting process, remember Marvin Harrison has to wait behind Andre Reed, and you're well, why? Marvin Harrison's a way better player than Andre Reed. Well, Andre Reed's been waiting longer. So who cares? Why is that relevant? Then he's got to wait a little bit longer. I mean, I don't understand. It feels so obvious. These fixes for the Hall of Fame process feel so obvious to me, and yet we just can't get it right. And these are smart people. I know people like to knock on the national NFL media, but these are smart, accomplished people that are in the room together. And even the Hall of Famers and these people that were Hall of Fame executives or players or whatever else, they know football. They know more football than I have ever forgotten, right? But why can't they just iron this out and get this thing right and make it make sense. Because doing this with Belichick, it's just and then you create even more of a logjam because now Belichick goes into the queue, right? And now he's waiting with everybody else, and and Reggie Wayne is just sitting back there, and Robert Mathis will be sitting back there, and it's just like and these guys are just never going to have a chance to get in because we have to deal out all of these petty. Well, Spygate happened, so you have to wait an extra year to get in the Hall of Fame. What are we doing? I mean, the class this year, Drew Brees, Larry Fitzgerald, Frank Gore, Luke Kuechly. I am not a big Eli Manning guy. Eli Manning is going to get in the Hall of Fame. And that's coming from a Giants fan or a former Giants fan. And I'm not a big Eli guy. I think he had two of the flukiest runs in sports history, those two Giants seasons, but it happened. And I think people are going to put him in because of it. And Terrell Suggs, Adam Vinatieri, Torrey Holt, Reggie Wayne, Jason Witten, Darren Woodson. I mean, it's a really good group that's this year, and you just keep, you throw people back into the pile when you need to kind of clear some of that logjam, and it's just sort of frustrating. But part of me, I guess, appreciates the pettiness of Bill Pulliam because if this is indeed true, and I'm assuming that it's true because just knowing, I'm not going to pretend like Bill Pulliam and I are best friends or anything, and that I know him real well, but just knowing what we know about Bill Pulliam in this town, I mean, which seems more plausible to you? That Bill Pulliam did not campaign for Bill Belichick to get in the Hall of Fame? And because of Spygate and because of hurt feelings over 20 years ago? Or do you think that he was just sitting there like, I don't care what you guys do. Yeah. Do what you're going to do with Billy. I don't even remember if I voted for Bill or not. Was eating a sandwich. I picked up some groceries. I don't even know. Come on, man. 239-1070. We come back. What Patriots Seahawks says about the Colts, plus Kevin Bowen at the top of the hour. It's Derek Schultz filling in for JMV on the ride on the Fan.
The Ride with JMV.
It takes him a second to get on the stool because he's under 5 feet tall.
93.5 and 107.5. The Fan.
So speaking of Belichick, now we're going to get into the Patriots and Seahawks in the Super Bowl. Ugh. Have a buddy of home, back home in Connecticut who, Connecticut was kind of weird because we were sort of on the dividing line of Boston and New York, even though I was more on the southwestern portion. So we were like an hour from New York City, and we were more like 2 hours and change from Boston. So a lot of, my teams were the New York teams, and then, a lot of my friends gravitated towards that way. But I did grow up with a couple of like Patriots, Celtics, Red Sox level fans. And my buddy who's still back east, he's in New Jersey, but he's a huge Sox, Pats, all that guy. And he put on his Instagram, he has a kindergartner, and put a picture of his kindergartner. He's, cute kid, little boy, just like I used to have now that he's 9. And he goes, this kindergartner's never gotten to see the Patriots in the Super Bowl until now. And I'm just like, that's just, and I know he's being like funny and all of that, but it stings deep. It stinks to see the Patriots back on this stage and back here again. And, I think what this matchup says about the Colts is that we're far past time to get this thing moving here, or not even that, because I think people here realize that, but that it shouldn't take this long. It shouldn't be this hard for the Colts to just get back in the mix. And I'm not even talking about making a Super Bowl. It's difficult to make a Super Bowl. But just to be in the playoffs, get on the dance floor, and give yourself a puncher's shot at making it and making a run. If you take what the Colts have done since Andrew Luck retired before the 2019 season, they have 0 playoff wins and just 1 appearance. They went the next year in 2020, the COVID season with Phillip Rivers. They went to the wild card round. They lost to the Bills in Buffalo. Frank Reich play calling, blah, blah, blah. Not going to rehash that entire game, but you guys know how that happened. They've not made the playoffs since then. In that same time frame, in fact, even more recently than that, the Seahawks and Russell Wilson parted ways at the end of the 2021 season. And they had some kind of middling seasons after that, right? The Seahawks weren't as much of a factor. They didn't like kind of fully bottom out and go away, but they brought in, was it Geno Smith? And he was fine. He was pretty okay. They won 9 games, 10 games, whatever they did. And then they decided to move on this offseason, and they made a big bet on Sam Darnold, and they paid him a lot of money. And they were betting that the season in Minnesota was not a fluke and not a product of what was a really talented roster around him. And that was a bet that won, because Seattle, pound for pound, was the best team in football this year, and they are going to be a heavy favorite here in the Super Bowl. I mean, I'd be shocked if they lost this game, honestly. And that's not me coming from like an anti-Patriot stance. I just think Seattle's that good. And then you look at New England, they bottom out after Brady. They had that brief sort of blip with, remember when Mac Jones was a thing? And we thought, like maybe Mac Jones can be a franchise quarterback. And it turns out he's fine. He's a good like spot starter, backup level guy, but not like the next big thing. But that 2021 season where when they came here and the Colts played them in that December game in primetime, and Jonathan Taylor had that essentially a walk-off homer in an NFL football game, which was like a 70-yard touchdown run, probably the peak moment of the post-Luck Colts. And that Patriots team made the playoffs. They had a good season. They got run off the field. I think it was by Buffalo, like 45 to 14 or something in that game. And then they really bottomed out after that. They had a couple of 4-win seasons. They were terrible last year, 4-13. But you bring in Drake May and you bring in Mike Vrabel, and here they are, and they're back. And they're only 2018, so they're only 7 seasons removed from their last Super Bowl, which feels like a long time because it's a completely new, no Brady, no Belichick, right? It's a brand new Patriots outside of Vrabel, I guess. But here they are again. And it just shows like the NFL timeline is quick. It's quick. Teams turn it around quickly. Teams go from good to bad to good to bad quickly. It's not like baseball. It's not like baseball. Pittsburgh Pirates are bad for 25 years and then they stay bad, right? Or even like basketball. The Wizards are bad and they're going to stay bad. The Hornets are bad and they're going to stay bad because they're just bad organizations. In football, it's really not even like that. Not even like the Browns. The Browns made the playoffs a couple of times in the 2020s with Stefanski. Browns are 2 years removed from a playoff berth, for God's sake. That's more than we can say about the Colts. So I'm not seeking out ways to get frustrated about where the Colts are, but just everything that happens in the NFL frustrates me. I'm so frustrated with where they are and what they say, and you got to be patient. Oh, the sense of urgency. I'm done, guys. I'm done being patient. Everybody here should be done. Colts fans have been very patient. This has been a very patient fan base. You know, Bears fans aren't that patient. They're not. You know, some of these other markets are not that patient. I think Colts fans, I think the Colts have it pretty good, considering how Colts fans have treated them here. I mean, I went to that game against Jacksonville. They had nothing to play for. It was the home season finale, and I'm way up. I'm in the 600 level. Landon was actually up there too. Was way up there, and in the row next to mine, somebody got moved out of their seat because they're like, "Oh, actually, that's my seat." And I'm like 5 rows from the very top of the stadium in a who cares game against the Jaguars. And so that shows where the fan support has been here. Like the Colts fans, they're not going anywhere. They haven't gone anywhere. They want to see this team succeed and they want to see them do well. And they don't want to see them go 8-9. And, you know, when we talk about standards and things like that, like we mentioned in the earlier portion of the show, like where the standard was and where the expectations were for like even Indiana and Purdue going into the year, the standard in this town used to be how the team performed right now, how the Colts did in January games against like the Steelers and the Patriots and teams like that. And now they want the standard to be, oh, well, you know, didn't you see we swept the Titans? Hey, did you see that game against the Raiders? In the Dolphins, we really blew them out back in September. Oh, on Halloween, we were the number 1 seed in the AFC. Oh, that's great. How did the rest of the season go? The season end on Halloween, or are you still you got games after that, or what? Is 8-1 and then it stops, or you know how's it? So Jonathan Taylor has the walk-off homer, and then like the season ended after that, right? That was. You didn't have anything else? You didn't go to Jacksonville after that game? You didn't lose to the game to the Raiders at home? A win in your in-game? Right? Those things didn't happen? Or, you know, win in your in-game, you lose the game against Houston. Down the stretch 2019, they collapsed. I mean, it's just it's frustrating. It's the same thing, just kind of over and over and over again. And the frustration is not that the Colts are bad. They're not bad. They're just not any good. They just don't matter. No one cares. No one nationally. There's no relevance right now to the Colts. They're not in the conversation. They're not in the mix. And that's a disheartening thing for a fan base for a long time, that they were always in the conversation. They were always in the room. They were at the top of the conversation a lot of the time. You know, they were one of the teams of the 2000s. And now, you know, you kind of laughed at that. And you said, well, they only won 1 Super Bowl. And you, Star Wars numbers. Oh, well. How they doing now, guys? How the Star Wars numbers look now? Pretty good. So Patriots, Seahawks, it's twisting the knife. The Patriots are twisting the knife. I mean, even without the context of what the Colts are doing, the Patriots being back in the Super Bowl, it's just ugh. But even the Seahawks, you know, you bring in a retread quarterback, which the Colts have tried to do over and over and over again. You bring in a retread and he wins at a high level, and you're going to win the whole thing. And you're just thinking to yourself, God, why can't they be us for once? We come back on the show. We'll get Kevin Bowen's thoughts on that. Talk about Alec Pierce as well and the Bill Belichick snub. Hour number 2 of The Ride with JMV is next on The Fan. Don't go anywhere.
The Ride with JMV.
I am the cream, yeah. The cream of the crop. And there is no one that does it better.
93.5 and 107.5. The Fan.
Welcome back. Hour number 2. It's The Ride with JMV here on The Fan. Derek Schultz filling in. Thanks for hanging. Temperature up to 11 degrees outside, which is exciting. You know, at least the sun's out. Sun's out, so that's good. And actually, a snowplow came through. I've lived in Midtown over by Butler for 12 years, and a snowplow had never once come down my side road until 2 days ago. And it was amazing. I mean, like, my neighbor was texting me. He's like, holy bleep, did you see this? Like, people were outside of their houses, like, giving the snowplows a standing ovation. Like, that's how big of a deal it was. But honestly, kudos to the city. Look, if you're from Hamilton County and you come in here and you're like, oh my God, the roads suck. Anybody that's lived in Indy for a long time, I think if you sort of looked around at this snow event and compared it to the recent ones of the past, which I know isn't saying much, I think they did a much better job this time around. At least in my neighborhood, they did. Joining us now, a fellow Midtowner. He is the host of the Fan Morning Show and the biggest Colts expert around. He's Kevin Bowen, who joins us now. And Kevin, does that back up your experience as far as the roads are concerned? I mean, I thought, again, with the caveat of it's not saying much, I did think that they did a better job than normal.
Yes, I could not agree more on that. I would echo these side streets. Yeah, it's like, you know, you're watching Santa Claus in the flesh all of a sudden as the plow is going down some of the side streets. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, outside of the temperatures and the snow melting, I feel like that's like the biggest issue now.
I think it's really awesome that you and Rake braved the snowy roads to make the buddy trip up to South Bend, and you've done that now, like 3 or 4 seasons in a row. I'm sorry for your Irish and for the OT loss. Did you end up sticking around for the whole thing?
Yeah, we did. I'd love to give Rake truth serum and see if he really was all about staying for both of those overtimes there. I know I kind of like sheepishly looked at him. Probably more after the first overtime than the second overtime, and thought to myself, hey, do you want to stay here? Because, you know, a midnight rearrival back to Indianapolis turned into 1 a.m., and I literally think we walked out of the arena, and IU-Purdue was already over with the first half. I think we were thinking, hey, we eat up the whole drive home by listening to Rob Blackman, Don Fisher, et cetera. So, yes, we did stay. Quite excruciating. I hope Rake was fully rested for a 7 a.m. Tennis here on this Wednesday morning, but unbelievable trooper that he is. He was all about it, and yeah, it was quite the entertaining game.
Man, so you both had early starts today. Well, that's good for you guys to soldier through it. Before we get into some Colts-related news, because even though it's late January and this is sort of the time of year where it's deader than dead on that front, I guess Bill Belichick is sort of Colts-related news. So what was your reaction to him getting stiffed on the Hall of Fame first ballot?
I mean, at first I was, you know, honestly, Rick and I were having a pregame drink, look up at the TV. I'm like, am I reading that correctly? Like, is that what that's saying? Like, you know, if you just live in a black and white world of, you know, Bill Belichick, Hall of Famer, you know, obviously the answer is yes, emphatically. You know, I actually have had a decent amount of people push back. I'm sure in our market it makes sense of like, hey, why aren't you factoring in any of the cheating? And you know, I guess when you look at the punishment, I get it was severe from a team standpoint, but it never got to the point of like outright suspension. And, you know, part of me thinks that is something you decide before you get to this part of the Hall of Fame process. You know, whatever, when this whole process starts and you start to cut down to the respective, you know, semifinalists, finalists, et cetera, you know, if a player is deemed whatever uncut due to, you know, suspensions or off the field issues, then, you know, they don't show up on the ballot. That's kind of how I view it. And I just think in general we have issues with voting for awards. And I honestly, and again, it's not apples to apples. I'm not acting like it is, but like, you know, I go back to like our Mr. Football award this year. I mean, we had a kid in, you know, Miles McLaughlin set a national single-season high school record. National single-season high school record. How long have they been playing high school football in the U.S.? And he sets a national record, and he gets like 60% of the vote. And it just seems like everybody has some sort of whatever, you know, whether it's a small school agenda or, you know, he gets the ball too much. Like everybody has this own little personal agenda with it, and I would be stunned if some of that wasn't involved in the Belichick vote. And I'm not this believer of like if you've waited your turn, you deserve to be higher up in the line than others. And I think honestly that happened with some of this voting, whether it was Ken Anderson or, Robert Kraft's CBA involvement. Like to me, it's not like whatever, Derek Schultz and James are in line at Holiday World. It's like, well, no, if Fernando Mendoza shows up to Splash and Safari, you're probably going to move out of the way. Like that's just kind of how it is. And I think Bill Belichick has a resume. Maybe I should be paying attention more to it and have the sanctity of the first ballot, but I just don't really have it.
I would not let Tom Brady cut James and I in line at Holiday World, just for the record there, Kevin. No, but I think what you said is right, and it's not, we're making this about the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I think you'd say this about the Baseball Hall of Fame, too. It's just, I think people are just getting in their feelings about it, and look, I don't have a vote for it. You don't have a vote for it, but if I did, I wouldn't be putting myself above the hall, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, I just think people are, getting in their feelings or their personal agendas when it comes to this. And really, it should just be, ultimately, it's one of those things that really you can just judge on paper, can't you? And just be like, look, 8 championships. Okay, next.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And again, maybe, I don't know, maybe I should have more value in, hey, first balloters for the elite and the clean. And, I'm not condoning by any means what he did, but I just feel like that's more of a, hey, if you're on the ballot, then it is a show me the results, show me the resume, show me what you just said, the 8 Super Bowls, and everything else that goes with his resume there. But again, maybe in our market, like we're getting a little bit more pushback just because we're naturally the villain or probably the one that, saw the biggest, there should be more on Napoleon's resume or Dungy's resume or Manning's resume, but I don't know. It just seems like a slippery slope. Like, are we not going to put Brady in first ballot because of this? Like, I mean, where are we going on this, and how far are you going on this?
We're talking with Kevin Bowen, host of the Fan Morning Show on the Andy Moore Group Automotive Hotline here on the ride. Speaking of Hall of Fames, I get that it's different for the players than it is for this like senior pool. Reggie Wayne is still in there, and he's been in there for a long time. And I think folks have long thought that Reggie Wayne, at least here, was eventually going to get in. But are you concerned at all, Kevin, that the national support is going to be tough as he continues to wait? Because I'm looking at this class right now, and I don't see the window cracking for Reggie Wayne in 2026.
No, and honestly, Derek, I'm a little worried about just tagging on a few more years to that. I don't. For example, this year, Larry Fitzgerald will be a first balloter. I assume Drew Brees. I think it'll be a very small class again. I mean, those are no doubters. And, we'll see about Adam Vinatieri. He didn't get in, which I didn't agree with last year. And, for those that haven't followed it, the Hall of Fame voting did change their process here in the last year or so. They wanted it to be more of a selective Hall of Fame. So basically, from what I understand, 50 voters, you can only vote for 3. And it has to be an 80% vote. So, again, unless you're the no-doubters, these classes are not going to be the 5-man classes that I think we were used to. When Dungy and Harrison both went in, they went in a 5-man class. That's no longer the case. And, when you think about whiteout, too, for example, I want to say it's Andre Reed got in over Marvin.
Yeah.
Marvin had to wait 3 years. And that was kind of going back to the whole line thing of like, well, that guy's waited his turn. It's like, well, no, like when people show up that have the resume that's better than the people that have waited, that's how the Hall of Fame works. Those guys should go in my opinion, sooner, earlier. And so I from what I've gathered and, talking with Mike Chappell, it just doesn't seem like Reggie is held in very high regard. And the postseason resume of him, ranking really high up there in catches and yards, it doesn't seem like that is really a whole lot of stock. So, I used to thought it'd be eventually the no-brainer. Freeney would get in and Vinatieri, of course, and Wayne. And, I even held a little bit of hope for Mathis, just leading the NFL history in forced fumbles and sacks and that stat. But I think right now Vinatieri will at some point, but I don't know about Reggie, man.
Yeah, and it's a bummer because I think we would all agree that when you take probably Peyton out of the equation. If you talk about most popular Colts, he would be way up there. I know some folks who that he's their number one. Even in front of Peyton and in front of anybody that's ever played. Speaking of, while we're on the topic of receivers, let's talk about. I think the current receiver room is a really interesting offseason. I don't want to say issue because that makes it sound like the Colts are in a bad spot. I don't think they're in a bad spot at all, but I think they are going to have to make some decisions, notably on what's going to happen here with Alec Pierce. Kevin, I'm under the assumption that, especially with the quote-unquote sense of urgency, that they're going to do everything that they can to keep him from hitting the market. But if that's the case, what do you think that price tag or ballpark is going to be for retaining Alec Pierce?
Yeah, I think it's going to be high. I think it'll shock some people, and some people will probably be turned off by it when they see that initial number. But, that to me is kind of what Alec Pierce has earned because he has the special trait, in a league that is just desperately defensive trying to take away big plays. So we can't allow him, two deep safeties, all of that. Pierce has shown the ability time and time again, no matter who the quarterback is, to still consistently produce those plays. And we don't even factor in how many pass interference penalties he draws on a pretty routine basis. So, the franchise tag number is $28 million, I believe, for a wideout. I would have, no issue in that. Because, again, if you're going to weigh like him and Michael Pittman Jr., and I think we're starting to do this, Pittman Jr.'s got one more year left. His cap hit is $29 million. Pierce is a free agent. First off, Pierce, 3 or 4 years younger. Secondly, who is easier to replace? Who has the trait that's harder to find? And I would argue it's Pierce. So, for me, it's not that big of a debate, albeit that price tag is going to be very, very high.
I think we know that, they're not going to bring back Michael Pittman Jr. on a $29 million cap hit. Like that's not going to happen. But does that mean that he's playing somewhere else? Or do you think there's a scenario where they go back to the, negotiation table as far as kind of maybe restructuring some of that to see if they can keep him around?
Yeah, I think you have to. And I think Pittman almost was resigned to that fact at the end of the season. I think he understands where he is at within this receiver room, especially with Pierce stepping up a little bit here. Now, I don't think you just let Pittman walk. I mean, I love Ashton Dulin as much as anybody else, but I don't know if he's, a 60-snap guy. And this is where the A.D. Mitchell trade does come into play a little bit here. If you still had Mitchell and he had shown growth that maybe he did show with the Jets, then, maybe you would feel a little bit more comfortable about that. So, if you are to let Pittman walk, I think wide receiver now becomes somewhat of a need here this offseason. And again, I think every time I pretend like the NFL is not a business, I quickly get reminded, or it's like opening up the door right now and feeling the weather outside. So I don't want to act like Michael Pittman Jr. is just here to take some pay cut, but by all accounts, he's loved it here. He's got the farm. He's got multiple kids. Like, is there any sort of, hey, let's restructure, let's extend you for a year, and, you're still going to make a pretty healthy penny, but maybe not at that $29 million cap hit. Now, again, having said that, when he signed the original deal a couple off seasons ago, he did what we saw Terry McLaurin do, back in August of, hey, I'm going to do the 3-year deal. The thought is I could still be in my prime and hit free agency one more time. Now, again, we can maybe a little bit of a catching up to Pittman, given his age and, hovering around 30 years old. But I think that was some of the thought process there. So I guess to answer it all, I would restructure, keep him here. But if you let him walk, then wide receiver now really, really skyrockets on the needs list.
And as you said, NFL is a business, but we've seen the man that is in charge of the personnel here, Chris Ballard, has been very loyal to his players, the guys that are perceived core players, and I think we would put Michael Pittman Jr. in that core. When we talk about last year, it was, okay, Chris Ballard was more aggressive in free agency, and we pushed him, and by we, I mean the ownership, the Irsay family, pushed him to be maybe more aggressive in free agency. Do they now, Kevin, have to push him to make some of these hard decisions when it comes to cuts? Like if it comes down to having to cut Michael Pittman Jr. or maybe even looking at Zaire Franklin and saying, yeah, you know what, we're moving on from this too, or any one of those number, the Colts have a couple of cut candidates on here to free up some money if they chose to go that way, but Ballard has very rarely chosen to seemingly go that way.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's one I kind of tossed his way a few weeks ago. Just, all right, this is out of the ordinary for you, but again, in the last 12 months, you have done some things differently, and he didn't commit to it. This time last year, he committed to the free agency thing pretty publicly. Hey, I do need to spend more, on the outside market. So, was that him just trying to, save face? And, he doesn't want to all of a sudden open that can of worms of us debating, Pittman here next year, Zaire Franklin here. I mean, you just went down the list. Kenny Moore II is a guy I'm like, okay, is he the ideal Lou Anarumo fit? I think you can get into debates about a lot of these guys. And depth at some of these positions I don't think are great to where it's as obvious as some others here. But, if you are going to make changes to your roster and keep Alec Pierce and Daniel Jones, I don't see how you can do it without a first-round pick, without restructuring some deals, at the very least. So I think that is going to have to be a part of it, or just outright cuts, to your point. Which, again, outside of quarterback, I just cannot recall, and I'm sure I'm missing people, but I cannot recall many, if any, times in Ballard's, previous, 9 years that he has signed some player and then before the end of that contract, let that player walk or cut that player, of course. That is very, anti what he has done here. So I think it's necessary if you're going to accomplish some stuff. I mean, if you're going to go out and find a starting defensive end opposite Latu and, maybe retool some of your linebacker room, I think you have to. I don't see how the math adds up to where you don't do some of those things, because the thing about the lack of a first-round pick, there's been drafts where he has not had a first-round pick.
Yeah.
But, that has been by choice, where they've taken the first-round pick and they've traded back, and they've just added second-rounders. You think about the Pittman and Taylor draft, or, go back to the Quentin Nelson draft. When they traded back from 3 to 6, they added some second-rounders. That's not the case. You traded your first-rounder for Sauce Gardner. So you don't have that available to you like you have maybe in some prior years.
We're hanging with Kevin Bowen, host of the Fan Morning Show on the Andy Moore Group Automotive Hotline. What kind of an indictment is it on the Colts? And I guess you can look at just about anything across the NFL and take it as an indictment on the Colts, Kevin, but especially with the Patriots and Seahawks in the sense that, here are the Patriots. They've rebuilt their entire operation really twice since Tom Brady left, because, there was the Mac Jones era and then now into the Drake May era. And then, of course, Mike Vrabel coming in too. And then you've got the Seahawks, who rebuilt theirs since trading Russell Wilson. And they did it with one retread in Geno Smith, and now they're doing it with another one who's taking them to a whole new level in Sam Darnold. And yet we're still waiting for the Colts. To me, Kevin, it's not even the fact that the Colts haven't gotten to the Super Bowl. It's the fact that they haven't even won a playoff game in that span since these other teams have kind of remade themselves several times over. Yeah,
and honestly, I think you can put so much of it to that defensive side of the ball with both these teams left, because that's been Ballard's baby. He has chosen a path with quarterback that has been more Band-Aid until the Anthony Richardson draft pick, which, again, that is his choice. I disagreed with it at the time, but, that is the path that he decided to. And honestly, Seattle has kind of done the same thing. They have opted for a little bit more Band-Aid post-Russell Wilson here than committing the draft pick like New England did with Drake May. But I think the defense of situation in both those places is much more apples to apples to Indianapolis, because, if you look at the Colts defense, it is richly invested with draft picks and money. And yet here you are routinely now, ranking near the bottom of the NFL, no matter who the coordinator is, in points allowed. So that, to me, I think is a little bit more of the damning amount of evidence. They obviously had on the Drake May draft pick. If you want to look at New England, and the Colts, had a chance to go and get Darnold. But, I don't know if anyone was standing on a table saying the Colts, should have done that. I think it's a little bit more on the defensive side when you look at all these defensive draft picks. And, again, guys, especially in the last kind of 4 to 5 drafts, that have just not been there for this team, specifically defensive end and corner. Sauce Gardner, that trade was so needed by a lot of people's eyes because you had whiffed on, Quincy Wilson and Rock Ya-Sin, and I'm sure there's another corner that I'm forgetting about in that mix as well. So, that to me, I think is a little bit more of a, okay, what do these Super Bowl teams have that the Colts haven't been able to do? Sure, you could point to Drake May at number 3 overall, but defense, I think, is a little bit more of a fair assessment.
Last thing here, Kevin, I know you've had a long day. Appreciate you joining us here late in the afternoon after that moonshine run there up to South Bend with Greg Rakestraw. But I know you didn't get a chance to watch the game last night. You said you got to listen to the second half. But just give me your thoughts on the current state of where IU is and where Purdue is right now. It's sort of a crossroads of the season where it looks like Purdue is sliding a little bit, whereas maybe IU, with their first signature win last night, can make a real NCAA tournament run.
Well, shout out. I don't know if I've ever complimented the old streaming world, but was actually able to watch, pretty much the entire second half via the old Peacock riding shotgun there with Greg Rakestraw as he manned the wheel. So I did catch that. I'd say for Indiana, have they found something with Nick Dorn in the starting lineup?
Yeah.
Because this is a different Indiana team than even 2 weeks ago. And again, throughout a basketball season, we don't always say that. You don't always change your lineups. But, in this case, have you found something here with Dorn as a starter? I think there's some evidence to definitely point to that. So I think that's where, the optimism for Indiana fans waking up today is not just rooted in, hey, you rode the Assembly Hall crowd to a nice win over your rival. Again, with Nick Dorn in the lineup, they have been a little bit better, and he was hurt earlier in the season. For Purdue, that was probably one of the more, animated I've seen Matt Painter postgame in a while. Like, it was UCLA and Illinois, I think you just kind of, a little bit of hands in the air. Like, we had a chance at the final media timeout. We didn't make the plays down the stretch. Obviously, the Illinois game, Wagler has 46. I think he felt like a lot of the issues for Purdue last night were in their strengths of like, hey, we should rebound the heck out of the ball against Indiana, and we didn't do that. Felt like it was a little bit more effort-based, maybe some defensive assignment stuff there in the first half. I guess you could go glass half full. Trakoff and Wren looked a little better last night. But I am curious how Purdue will now respond because, again, I think Painter was, and maybe it's just the third straight loss, but I thought he was a little bit more animated than he usually is, post-game even after a loss.
Yeah, I think Painter looked at it and was like, look, this is our team, so if they're not going to be better than this, then that's on them. Because at this point, Trakoff and Wren, Fletcher Lawyer, Braden Smith, they played, 100-plus college basketball games, and they got to bring more to the table than what they brought last night, that's for sure. You can follow Kevin on X, Twitter, at KBowen1070. Of course, mornings right here on The Fan. Always appreciate it, buddy. Keep up the great work in the morning drive as well.
You bet, Derek. Thanks for having me, man, and best to you and the family.
That's our friend Kevin Bowen. Always great. And I was not aware of the fact that, he was able to see the game last night. So that's good that he was able to catch some of that as well. But that's a hike. Even with the bypass through Kokomo, that's a haul from South Bend. And I've done that drive before where it's pitch black outside, and it is nicer to not have to go through like the Cracker Barrel and Kokomo and the mall and things like that and get stopped at every stoplight on the way. But still, that's a difficult drive then to get ready and be on the show for the morning. But that's how committed Kevin is. The best Colts expert that there is there. And you can follow his blog and his podcast, of course, 1070thefan.com or 1075thefan.com as well. We come back on the show, more on IU and Purdue and what it means for both teams. Galen Clavio, who's the host of Crimson Cast, the longest-running podcast on IU sports, slated to join us in about 10 minutes as well. It's The Ride with JMV. Don't go anywhere here on The Fan.
The Ride with JMV.
Now you listen here. He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy. Now go away.
93.5 and 107.5. The Fan.
Thanks again to Kevin Bowen for joining us. Thanks to you for hanging. It's The Ride with JMV. John out today. I'm Derek Schultz filling in. He will be back tomorrow. Indiana knocking off Purdue last night. We're going to talk about that coming up here with our next guest. 72-67, the Hoosiers win, their first quad one win of the year, their first quality win of the season, as well as they try to build an NCAA tournament win. The metrics really like IU. So the net, Torvik, and Ken Pom, and all these things that people kind of nerd out on, pretty firmly have IU as a top 40-ish team. And that, generally speaking, that's good enough to make an at-large bid. But you also have to have wins over other teams. In order to make the NCAA tournament, you have to have wins over teams that are going to make the NCAA tournament, to put it in layman's terms. And Indiana got one last night over a Purdue team that I have some Purdue fan friends that are in their feelings right now for sure. But that's still a team that obviously is going to make the NCAA tournament. Maybe that doesn't remain a quad one win, but it's going to remain a quality win for IU here moving forward, and one that they really needed, considering that they've got 6 more opportunities for quad one wins as they stand right now, and 5 of those are on the road. And we all know that in Big Ten play, those road games can be really tough. But we will talk some basketball with our next guest. But really, I wanted to invite him on to talk more about football and just kind of tie a bow on what was just an incredible season, one of the most incredible seasons in Indiana sports history. I'm not just talking about Indiana University, but Galen Clavio is the host of the Crimson Cast podcast. It is the longest running show on IU sports, and he joins us now on the Andy Moore Automotive Group hotline. And Galen, you still coming down off that football high, or is it still hitting just like it did on the field in Miami the other night?
It's still hitting, and in fact, I hope I don't come down from this feeling. It's been delightful for over a week. I always wondered what winning a football title would feel like, and it's a nice feeling, I got to say.
I imagine that it is. All of this is out the window now, but there had been a lot of skeptics about Indiana football, especially nationally, but even locally, that IU's 2024 season was just, kind of the Cinderella run, and they were going to go back into their corner, right? Indiana was going to go back to where they belonged in the college football sort of pecking order. And I'm guessing that probably some of that arises from the COVID era successes of 2019 and 2020 quickly vanished for IU, and then they went back down, right? But you had remained adamant that all of this was real. Do you feel validated now in that stance, even if I'm not sure that you had national champion on your bingo card for 2025?
No, I did not have that. I said we were going to go 10-2 this year, and I felt really good about that because of the quality of players that remained and because of the track record of Cignetti and his coaches in developing talent. Now, I think the skepticism from a lot of people was based on how college football normally works. It normally takes a long time to build a program up to the point where they can be a contender for a national title, let alone win a national title. This whole thing has just been so supercharged that I don't necessarily blame people for being skeptical, but I do think that there were some important signs that people missed along the way. I'll also say, though, I think a lot of that skepticism really fueled Cignetti and members of this team who felt like what should have been a celebrated season almost got made fun of as not being representative. And I think they took that seriously and they took it personally.
Do you think that, speaking of kind of the Cinderella aspect of it, there's been so much focus on what Indiana was, and I just feel like maybe there hasn't been enough focus on what Indiana is. Like I had a buddy of mine post on Facebook, and he's like, this has been such an amazing story for Indiana to do this. I mean, what do they have, like 2 NFL players on this team? And I'm thinking to myself, buddy, they got a lot more than 2 NFL players on this team. I mean, they don't discredit them that much. I guess what I'm guarding against, Galen, is that I want to be sort of defensive over the fact that 2025 Indiana was a really good football team, like one of the best football teams of this century. And yes, like the Cinderella aspect of the story is part of the story, but I wanted to make sure that people didn't feel like, that was the whole story. Kind of like patting them on the head like they did with the 2024 team, like, oh yeah, good job, buddy.
Right. Well, and this is where a lot of how we talk about college football is so based on recruiting rankings. And that becomes the prism that everybody looks at the sport through. It's like, well, how many guys who are projected as first-round picks or likely first-round picks do you have on your roster? Indiana's got several guys that are going to play a long time in the NFL. And, it's not just Fernando Mendoza or, D'Angelo Pons or Elijah Surratt. Aiden Fisher is probably going to latch on somewhere. Riley Nowakowski is going to be a guy that will probably have a long career in the NFL. Omar Cooper. These guys developed into NFL players. And I think that it's so easy for us to get caught up in the idea that these were lightly regarded players in recruiting or in the portal. What we really need to be focusing on, and what I think is the big take-home lesson of Indiana football, is that it's production over potential. It's what Cignetti constantly says. It's not what we thought you were. It's what you show that you can do on the field. And so you're right. Like, in getting caught up in this idea that this is the Cinderella story, it is a Cinderella story, but it's not a team full of Cinderellas at this point. It's a team full of players that are going to be playing on Sundays and a team that's probably going to be a contender again next year.
How much credit do you give Kevin Wilson and Tom Allen and, sort of the groundwork that was laid? I don't think anybody knew, even during some of those successful years under Wilson where they were making bowl games, and then obviously I mentioned 19 and 20 under Allen, that they would get here this quickly. But how much credit do you give those two just for laying some of the groundwork that I guess maybe showed the IU administration that competing at or near this level was at least a possibility instead of a pipe dream for the program?
I don't think people realize how bad a shape IU athletics were in, not just football, but football was in the worst shape of all of them around 2005, 2006, right around when you and I were in school,
yeah.
Derek. And so I always start with Fred Glass, who was the one that, was able to marshal the funds together to get a lot of this going, to get some of these hires made, to get the facilities upgrades. The Kevin Wilson hire was important. I like Kevin. Kevin's flawed, but he's brilliant. He understood what a top-level program should look like, and it took a lot of prodding to get Indiana slowly to move in that direction. Tom Allen took it to another level. Tom had his own flaws in terms of management, but he brought an enthusiasm, and he kept pushing the envelope as well. All of these steps were necessary. And when we talk about Indiana having overnight success, it's not overnight in as much as there was a long-tailed build where Indiana stumbled at the wrong times, but was far more competitive than they had been in the previous decade. And they got very lucky because they hire Scott Dolson, and Dolson makes the right set of hires moving forward. And then they get Cignetti, who is clearly a genius at logistics and management and understanding how to develop players. Nobody could have predicted that piece would have fallen into their lap the way that it did. It took so many coincidences to get there. But I think all of those people helped to contribute to the point where Indiana could take advantage of Cignetti and his skills and abilities and give him the platform to succeed the way that he has.
Let's talk about the current team now. We saw 4 of the 5 starters on the offensive line returning. IU went crazy in the transfer portal, a lot of big names, and recruiting is understandably burning red hot right now, as per usual in the wake of a title. A lot of people want to jump on board and be part of this thing. But as you've said repeatedly on your show, college football is now a year-to-year proposition. There's nothing guaranteed at this point. But is there any reason to believe that IU won't be in a position to defend that title again, in a very good position to do so in 2026?
No, there's no reason. I'll say this. The one thing that will be concerning to me has very little to do with the talent level of the players, and it has everything to do with this team's secret sauce this year and last year was the continuity of culture.
Yeah.
And this team's ability to play with each other, understand each other, be on the same page with each other and really root for each other. That gets hard to sustain when those players start to graduate. And now over the course of these 2 years, you've seen a lot of these guys move on because they're out of eligibility. So how well does Indiana pass the culture down that really started with the JMU guys that transferred in, but was bought into by the players that were here and then the guys that came into the portal? But if you just look at the numbers, Indiana is fishing in a much richer river for talent than they were last year. They've got a top 3 portal class, if not the top portal class. They've got a really experienced quarterback. They've got arguably the best, one of the three best receivers in the Big Ten transferring in. They've got great talent returning. There's so many things when you look at this roster. It's like this is a top 5 roster, and this is a roster that is going to be coached by this same coaching staff who've already demonstrated their superiority over the last 2 years. I mean, the thing I've had to get my head wrapped around, Derek, is every team in college football has holes, and everybody's going to have depth issues. Everybody's going to have a flaw here or there that can be exploited. But Indiana is in as good a shape as any team right now in terms of how they look going into next year. And, you know, at some point you've got to start saying, if you're an outside pundit, like, I'm going to stop doubting Indiana. I'm just going to maybe assume that they'll be good. And I think that that's where the program's at right now.
Galen Clavio is the host of the Crimson Cast podcast. He joins us on the Andy Moore Automotive Group hotline. Shifting over to basketball, you know, last night's win over Purdue, perfect chance for IU fans to kind of mentally shift from football to hoops, right? I think some IU fans were like reintroducing themselves with men's basketball last night. What do you think about where Darren DeVries' first squad sits right now? I know Purdue was the first quality win, but their metrics are strong. Nick Dorn's been a bit of a revelation, and if they can stay in the Big Ten's upper half, do you think that they're in a good spot to make a push for the NCAA tournament here?
I do. Look, there's been a lot of, I think, growing pains with this roster. It's a roster that has to either shoot well or defend well in order to win, and they've had games where they've done neither of those at key moments. And you know, they haven't gotten, I think, the outside shooting that they thought they were going to get out of Tucker DeVries. He's struggled mightily, and I got to think that there's some kind of an injury that's playing into that. But to watch Lamar Wilkerson play as well as he's played, to get the contributions, like you said, that they've gotten out of Nick Dorn, you know, they have some cool pieces that when they're playing at their best and playing collectively, you know, on the same page, they can beat pretty much anybody in the Big Ten. They're not strong enough to contend for a title this year, either Big Ten or national, but I like the foundation that's being laid. And I think that, you know, this is where having football be so good, I think, gives Darren DeVries some very necessary cover. This is not the type of roster we'll see moving forward in future years because there'll be more recruiting and they'll be able to better select. I mean, many people forget, there was nobody on the roster when DeVries took over, essentially. Everybody got in the portal. Nobody came back. They had to build this from scratch. And look, I haven't been there have been games where I've been very disappointed with how they've not finished, you know, the Kentucky game, the Nebraska game, the way they started the Louisville game. I mean, there have been a lot of those moments where it's clearly not worked as well as it should, but that was a huge win for them against Purdue. And you really, I at least get the sense that could be a turning point, you know, for a team that's got 10 games left in conference. And of those 10 games, 7 of them are very winnable. I mean, they've got at Illinois, at Purdue, and Michigan State at home. But even if you lose those 3, there's 7 other games that are really winnable on the schedule. So I like where they're positioned. They've just got to play with the same intensity that they played with last night.
Last thing here, Galen, I didn't know if you did you take time to reflect during that football run and soak it in? You strike me as somebody that would soak that in because, you know, Indiana may indeed have made more championships in their future. I don't want to make it sound like it's a one-off or anything like that, but am I right in saying, I mean, your first run is your first run, and I don't think anything is ever going to feel like that one did to you or to so many IU football fans?
I've spent a lot of time reflecting, and it's funny that you would phrase it that way because I've actually given that same phrase to other people. Like, you only win your first championship once. And I think for me, as someone who has obviously podcasted about the team for a long time, went to school here, was a fan long before I came to school, this was, with Indiana football, the team I had the deepest emotional connection with. And there's a variety of reasons for that, family reasons, but also that you almost become defensive about IU football if you're a true IU football fan, because you feel like you're oftentimes on an island with that fandom.
Sure.
And, you know, you get made fun of constantly. And I mean, you know, even Purdue fans who, frankly, I mean, their football history is not covered in tremendously more glory than Indiana's, but even they're looking down on you in the Big Ten. And so this 2-year run, and this year in particular, watching Indiana escape its own DNA and become a championship program and feeling like you're along for the ride. And this is where, honestly, one of the things I've reflected on, Derek, Curt Cignetti does so many things well, but one of the things that he does not get nearly enough credit for is he is very inviting of the fan base to feel like they're part of the success. And I saw that when I was in Pasadena, when I was in Lucas Oil Stadium for the Big Ten Championship game, when I was in Atlanta, when I was in Miami. The number of IU alums who have not been huge IU football fans but feel like they are part of this is so touching to me as someone who has been along for the ride for a long time. I love that there's all of these folks that are along for it now, and I'm hoping that this really becomes a foundational point where everybody that's in the IU alumni base has a rooting interest in IU football. So for me, a lot of the reflections have been like all of the bad times and all of the moments where you're like, why am I pouring so much effort and attention into watching this team and following them around? But to watch it all pay off like this, it's just something that most fan bases never get, and especially at the depths from which Indiana football felt like it came.
Yeah, no question. And, I saw that picture of you on the field. I think you were just sitting on the field and among all the confetti there in Miami. And I was happy for you because not that I'm not happy for other IU fans. I mean, I went there too. Anybody that, says that they're an IU fan gets to wear it, right? Just like you said with Curt Cignetti. But there were those select few that truly suffered through being a loyal IU football fan. And I know you and Scott were two of those people, so I was happy for you guys. The best IU football show around, one of the best IU shows, period, is Crimson Cast. You guys should make that part of your rotation. Episodes uploaded regularly on the Back Home Network. You can also follow the show at Crimson Cast. Appreciate it as always, my man. Thanks so much, Galen.
Thanks, Derek. Have a good one.
That's Galen Clavio of Crimson Cast. And yeah, like I know that anybody that went to school there, or even if you didn't go to school there are lots of people that have never been to Bloomington that call themselves IU fans. You get to own it. I'm not going to gatekeep IU fandom, but I do know I had a half dozen people in my life that were true blue, true cream and crimson, if you will, IU football fans, and Galen was one of them. And those are the people that I was especially happy for, because that is a lot of suffering that you have to go through to be an IU football fan and to kind of come out the other side like Andy Dufresne and Shawshank Redemption. It was poetic. I mean, it was special. It was just an incredible story that's going to be hard to be topped, that's for sure. We come back where we react to the big headlines of the day. Top of the hour, Patrick Talty is the president of Indiana Sports Corps, and he's going to talk about potentially hosting the NFL draft and the recruitment process of what that can look like, not only for our friends at Sports Corps, but for Visit Indy and for the entire city about putting that event on. This is The Ride with JMV on The Fan.
The Ride with JMV.
Well, we're waiting.
93.5 and 107.5. The Fan.
Thanks so much to Galen Clavio for joining us. Talking a little IU football. I think it's very safe to say. How long has the Fan been around? We launched this January of 2008. It's almost 20 years. I think sports talk radio in this city probably dates back to the very early 2000s or so, maybe even I'm thinking about like Mark Patrick, who JMV used to produce for. That probably would have been in the 90s. So, okay, let's say that sports talk radio has been around probably for 30-something years in Indianapolis. I can say with confidence that is the first time ever that we talked Indiana University football on January 28th on any platform. Right? But that's what just happened with the run, and it's crazy. I had to go online to get my father-in-law a shirt. I'm shipping him IU football stuff out of Vermont because he wants to wear an IU football sweatshirt around. My son is kind of in an awkward spot because both of his parents went to IU, but I work for Purdue now, and we watch Purdue games together. So James has decided that he is a Purdue basketball / IU football fan, where I was kind of like, I don't have the heart to tell him, buddy, I don't think that's going to fly, bud. I don't think that's going to work. I don't think your friends are going to go for that. But I don't know. Root for whoever you want to root for. It was a great run, and I think even people that were non-IU football fans appreciated the story, I guess, even if you weren't like actively rooting for them. I have some Purdue fan buddies that were actively not rooting for Indiana, which makes sense. It's a rivalry, but I think you have to appreciate the out of nowhere story of it. I mean, it's just it really is incredible. Going to the current state of teams that are still playing, including the IU basketball team, they get a big win over Purdue last night, 72-67 for their first quad one win. And we talked a little bit about that with Galen as well. And it's interesting, like last night's game, I think in a lot of ways was sort of a crossroads of the season for both teams. And look, I want to be careful here because we do this way too often where we're so reactionary. These seasons are long. And a team and what they are on January 28th a lot of times is not what they are on February 28th, is not what they are on March 28th. There is a lot of season left to go for both of these teams. But I do think that every team reaches several kind of crossing points, some crossroads on this journey. If we're to like compare it, people in Indiana love road trips, right? Hey, we're going to Florida and it's a 13-hour drive. Great. Hop in the car, grab all your crap and let's go. If you're comparing it to that, there are lots of like areas where you have those crossroads. And I think the crossroads last night, it was big for Indiana to get that quad one win. It was big for Purdue to lose for a third straight game. And now, you got Indiana looking like they're on the uptick and Purdue is going the opposite way. And those things can still be corrected and they can still go the other way. But I think just a really big result for both of those teams. I think a critical loss for Purdue. I think it takes them out of the Big Ten title race, and a critical win for Indiana in that it really kind of kickstarts a possible NCAA tournament bid because their resume, I don't think, was even really going to be under consideration until you finally get a quality win, and they got one last night over the Boilers. We'll talk NFL draft and the possibility of that coming to Indianapolis with a guy who has a big job in making those things happen. Patrick Talty of the Indiana Sports Corps. He's the president, and he joins us next on The Ride with JMV here on The Fan.
The Ride with JMV.
I don't understand a word you just said.
93.5 and 107.5. The Fan.
5 o'clock hour on The Ride. Thanks so much for making us a part of your Hump Day Wednesday. Filling in for JMV, I'm Derek Schultz. We have Patrick Talty. He's the president of Indiana Sports Corps coming up in just a second, but I have to do this, and I hate to make Patrick wait just real quick. James told me that Turnbuckle Bill called in, and since I'm not on the air anymore every day like I was back in a past life, and I don't get to talk to Bill very much, I want to fit in his phone call. And I know he's a diehard. He's exactly the person that I was talking about in the last segment when I said the people in my life that I know that suffered through IU football, that were real deal, cream and crimson IU football fans. Bill is definitely one of them. It's great to hear from you, pal. How are you?
Derek, always good to hear your voice, and I can only quote the late, great Jackie Gleason and say how sweet it is. It was just beautiful watching what happened, and I'm not going to go into all the different things, but I think what Cignetti and IU is kind of proved in football, that having a less than stellar pre-Big Ten season schedule really works in their favor, because you get a chance to actually scout some of these guys that are going to be in the portal from schools that do not have the NIL capability like IU has. And next year our schedule is we play North Texas State, Howard, whose nickname is the Bison.
Yeah, I think they have Lawrence North in there somewhere.
Yeah, and then they got Western Kentucky. But all that does is kind of gives you a chance to scout. I was really against NIL and everything, because I was just kind of a blue blood about it. But now you see the real value of it, and then Cignetti definitely has seen it, where you get a chance to actually scout in different parts of the country players that could potentially come to your program. And I agree with the hypothesis that and I want to know who these guys are that make these high school kids 5-star recruits. I mean, how do you actually do that? I mean, I know there's a way you can do it, but obviously, you take a bunch of kids that were 2- and 3-star recruits and everything, and you put them into a situation where they're looking to say, hey, where I'm going has got a lot of money. I'm going to make some money here. It's just such a great incentive.
And Bill, I'm going to grow and develop. And thanks. It's great to hear from you, buddy, and great to hear your voice. And then I'm going to grow and develop. And, we spent so much time talking about what those guys were, like what Mendoza and all those guys, well, they were 2-star recruits. They were, Elijah Surratt was at D2. He was a D2 player, right? We're not talking about what they became. By the end of it, they became something entirely different, and so did that football team. Joining us now on the Andy Moore Automotive Group hotline, he is the president of Indiana Sports Corps, and he's Patrick Talty, kind enough to give us a couple of minutes here. And Patrick, I know you probably have the Final Four and umpteen other things on your brain, so I appreciate you placating me to talk about an event that is just a potential one, a projection, right, at this point. But, I saw Chris Gall and Visit Indy, a mutual friend of ours, was talking about the NFL executives being here for the NFL Combine coming up in a couple of weeks, and Visit Indy, your partners there, and the CIB, and of course Indiana Sports Corps being involved in taking some of those executives around and showing them potential sites for potentially hosting, again, I'm going to keep saying potentially over and over again, the NFL draft. But how are you and your partners in the city kind of pursuing this opportunity of taking on what we've seen become a hugely, hugely popular event since they opened it past the ballroom at Radio City Music Hall?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for giving me some time today. But we're really excited that the Combine extended for another 2 years. That's $9 million of economic impact every year, 30,000 fans coming into the town. Because what that does is it gives us the ability to have NFL executives here year in and year out. The Combine's never been anywhere else. And so what better story than to have the Combine lead into the draft? So when we have the executives here, we're going to take them around and show them kind of what our vision is for the draft, what it could potentially be, what we believe would be an awesome setup for downtown Indianapolis to really think through how we would present the draft, because it has become an amazing event. It's become an event that NFL fans from all over the country come, because all 32 teams all are they all have joy, and they all have hope, and they all are 0-0, and they all have the year to look forward to. So this has become a great event, and we're really excited about the opportunity to show off the city and show how we're growing. I mean, we have the new Signia Hotel, we have the Convention Center expansion. All those things will be in play for us for a draft.
And I saw that the sites that were reported by the Indianapolis Business Journal, I think, were Military Park, White River State Park, and the south side of Lucas Oil Stadium as potential locations. Are others, or would others be investigated? And I fully understand that that's maybe a cross that bridge when we get there type thing, but just kind of projecting forward and thinking forward.
Yeah, no, I think the one that having the Final Four this year and doing the Music Fest out at American Legion Mall, I think that gives us a great blueprint for what could be out that way. Obviously, Military Park is always a great space. So is the south side of Lucas Oil Stadium. I think that we'll end up using all of those different areas in different ways as we have the celebration of football. So I think it's probably too early to really say, hey, this is what it'll be. We're just really showing the assets that we have in Indianapolis and really saying this is what you could make your canvas. Now let's think about how we put the draft together in this.
Is this, Patrick, the first pursuit that the first run that Indy has made at the NFL draft, or has this been an ongoing pursuit since whenever? I know they've opened this up now. What was it, like 10 years ago, I think, was the first time that they took it outside of New York City?
Yeah, each time that they come out with letters of interest for cities to say, hey, that they're interested in the draft, and also that includes, the combine and other events like that. We've always put a letter of interest in saying, yeah, we'd be interested in talking about hosting it. I think this is the first time we've really had an opportunity to show them the spaces and really think through what a draft site could look like. And what our vision would be around that. And so this is a step forward, and we're really excited about that step. Still a long ways away. Does not mean anything for sure. It just means that they're interested in thinking about Indy for the draft. And obviously, as we've said before, it is a hugely successful event. So we think it'd be great here in Indianapolis.
Those crowd numbers the NFL has reported, I mean, hugely popular is right. I think they said almost 800,000 for Detroit. It's quite eye-popping. You mentioned the Signia Hotel and some of the new things and the build-out, the continued build-out of Indianapolis. I'm assuming the city feels confident they can handle that type of crowd over 3 days?
I mean, we've done – you think about what the last couple of years we've had, 3 nights of Taylor Swift. We had the Eclipse happen. We're hosting the Final Four. We've done 2 an NBA All-Star and a WNBA All-Star, all of these people coming again and again and again, not to mention the tourism that we have. I think Indianapolis has been built for events. I think our people and our hospitality workers, know how to put on great events. They know how to welcome people, and they know how to handle it. And I think it'll just, continue to be something that will be successful. And I think Indy is a perfect place for it. I mean, we are set up well. We are built well. We have the history, we have the experience, and I have no doubt that we will be successful if we're so lucky to get to host it.
I know you have to fight to keep it, but, we've been talking about, or I say folks nationally have been talking about the potential of the NFL Combine going somewhere else for a long time, and yet it still hasn't gone anywhere else. It keeps re-upping with Indianapolis over and over again. Is Indy just in a unique position? Because I think people on the outside looking in don't realize, logistically speaking, how well Indy is constructed when it comes to, the medicals and Eskenazi and Methodist and everything that's involved besides just the actual hosting of, having all the football coaches at St. Elmo and some of those other things.
Yeah, no, I mean, what you said is right. We have to fight every single year for it because it is one of those events that people want to have in their communities because they see it as an opportunity to host the NFL. So it has definitely been something that we work hard at. We work hard at hosting it each and every year. And obviously they've opened it up to fans the last couple of years. And so we're making sure that we can welcome those fans. But it's really the partnerships that have set Indy apart. And what you outlaid is all those logistical things. Yeah, you could bring that together in another community maybe, but it's because we've been doing it and because we work together that makes it seamless. And I think that is the piece that's really unique for Indianapolis. And we're really excited that the NFL has chosen to re-up for another 2 years. And we're really confident that we can continue to have a great event with the Combine.
Patrick Dalty is the president of Indiana Sports Corps. He joins us on the Andy Moore Automotive Group hotline here on the Ride with JMV. Indy's reputation, Patrick, as you know, a big sporting event city, it leads to some people probably coming to you. But how much of what you and other city leaders have to do to kind of stay on the offensive to proactively pitch events and leagues and organizations on either coming here or returning here?
I mean, we are constantly out. Visit Indy and the CIB and our organization are constantly out talking to folks. Always trying to make sure that we stay in the forethought of them and Indianapolis and the things that we have to offer, because the community and the communities in the competition are getting stronger. I mean, you think we were the first sports commission founded back in 1979. Now there's over 350 of them across the country fighting for sporting events in their communities. You think about the cities that we would never talk about before: Las Vegas, L.A., places, Nashville, places like that never would be on the radar, now all of a sudden are. And there's a building boom happening. Washington, D.C. just announced a dome roof stadium. Nashville has a dome roof stadium. Cleveland just announced one. Now you're talking about, because the Big Ten is coast to coast, now you're talking about Vegas and L.A. and other places like that are now in the mix for these events. So the competition's gotten so hard. We have to make sure that we are constantly out talking about why Indy and why come here, and it's because of what we've done in the past, and we're going to continue to keep doing that.
I know you're leading the group to cross the T's and dot the final I's, because the men's Final Four will be here before we know it, and I think it's more exciting this year, Patrick, because no offense to the 2021 tournament, that was different circumstances, to say the least. I mean, it was a little bit surreal, right? With, the pandemic restrictions and all of that. I mean, this, for all intents and purposes, will be the first time that Indy has hosted a normal Final Four since the 2015 one, which feels like forever ago. But how jazzed up and geeked up are you and ready to go to showcase the city again in an event that has been here for, 40, 50 years now on rotation?
I mean, we're really excited because for the first time ever, we're going to be hosting not only Division I at Lucas Oil Stadium, but we're going to have the Division II, Division III championships, along with the NIT semifinals and championships, and those will be happening at Gamebridge. So basketball starts on Thursday, and it goes all the way through Monday. So this is a true celebration of college basketball. So we are really excited because that's never been done before, and we think this is the best place. And this is a totally different event from what it was in 2015 in terms of the opportunities that fans have to come down and participate. There's Fan Fest and Music Fest, and there's a dribble for kids, the dribble on Sundays through downtown. I mean, there's just all kinds of activities at Tip-Off Tailgate on Georgia Street. So if you don't have a ticket, no problem. Come out and enjoy the men's Final Four and all of the celebration of college basketball, and it's going to be amazing. And I know Indy will show up.
Kind of a dumb question, and maybe you felt like all my questions were dumb questions, Patrick, but you're being nice about it, so I appreciate it. Is any other city planning to do in the future what Indy's doing here with the all divisions? Like all of the basketball is going to be decided in one place. I understand that some, probably like San Antonio, would not be built to be able to do that, but maybe some of the, Atlanta, New Orleans, or some of the larger cities would be able to make that happen.
Yeah, that really is up to the NCAA. They make those decisions at their different council levels, and we're just ecstatic that we got the opportunity to do it here first.
Yeah, it'll be really cool. I already signed up our third grader for the dribbling deal. We did that before the WNBA All-Star game, and it was a beautiful day, and it was a lot of fun. And looking forward to all the new wrinkles, and you guys do such a great job of putting on those events. At Patrick Dalty on X and Twitter if you want to follow along. And we're no strangers here in this town to Indiana Sports Corps and Visit Indy and all of these great branches that make these events possible. Really appreciate the time, Patrick, and best of luck with the Final Four.
No, thank you. Appreciate it, and looking forward to it.
That's Patrick Dalty, and the folks at Indiana Sports Corps. It's unique that, as he mentioned, the first commission and just what sports have done to transform this city. I did not grow up here. I was not here in 1985. I was not here in 1995, but I just know from leaning on people like Jake Query and other dear friends that are Indianapolis lifers, I've been given kind of a window into what Indianapolis was. And it's not that it was some hellscape or anything like that, but it was a lot different. It was a lot more small time than it is right now. It was a lot more Omaha than it was, made in, no offense to Omaha, it's a lovely place, but then like major sports city that people think of in that conversation with, Dallas and Miami and LA and Chicago and New York and all these other places that we talk about, these major markets where major events come and thrive. And Indianapolis has done such a great job. So I think, all this like outside the box stuff, like it's almost like, the Final Four is old hat, right? I mean, they always do the Final Four, Big Ten tournaments and things like that. Like that's, I know Patrick's not going to approach it this way, or the people that organize it still put in the same amount of work that they always have. But, Indy's at the point now where you roll out of bed and host those events, right? You can do that in your sleep. They're so good at it. But this outside the box stuff, like the NFL draft and the logistics there, it's unique. It's different. The WWE and all that, the Royal Rumble. And then I think we're getting a SummerSlam, or we're going to get a WrestleMania, these crown jewel events of WWE. It's a big deal. To be on the radar for that, and to have that sort of agreement in place, and for Indy to be in a position to put on those events and capitalize from those events and activate our downtown as well, and our fantastic venues that we have here, and the volunteers and the people. And I the best compliment I think that you can give Indianapolis when these events come through is that everybody knows that they're happening. You go to New York, or, one of these, New York is probably too extreme of an example, but, you go to some of these other places, and I've been to Atlanta for the Final Four. That's a good example, right? And you go around Atlanta and you're walking around downtown, and, there's a parking garage and a hotel, and then a parking garage and a hotel, and then a parking garage. You don't see anybody. But, you go through and you might not know that the Final Four is going on unless you're over near the Georgia Dome. At least that's when the Georgia Dome was still standing. And here you have these events and everybody knows, oh yeah, like the WNBA All-Star Game is happening this weekend. Oh yeah, the men's Final Four is this weekend. I'm not even talking about the Super Bowl. Duh, everybody knew the Super Bowl was happening. But I just mean in general, like people, there are signs about it. They rename the streets. Like it's kind of cheeseball, right? But it's cutesy and fun. It's like, oh look, there's Fighting Illini Way instead of Illinois Street or whatever. Indy really leans into it. And I always find that endearing. I like the fact that there's so much pride. So there's the same amount of pride seemingly associated with that in 2026 that there was in 1986. And I think that's pretty cool. Like people in Indianapolis want you to come here and tell you about how great of a time that they had. Whereas people in New York, and I know this from growing up, like back in, adjacent to that area, they don't care. You come to New York and you hate it. The subway smells and whatever. A rat ate my bagel. Okay, great. I don't care. Get lost. I don't care whether you like New York, you hate New York, whatever. Like, who cares? I'm getting on with my day. And here in Indy, like there is a pride that is associated with that people here really want you to have fun and enjoy it and have a special experience that's different from everywhere else. And visit Indy, Sports Core, CIB, all these, even city leaders, everybody that it comes together, the volunteers, it takes a village, right? I know it's corny to say, but it really is true when it comes to these events. So we'll see about the NFL draft. I'm still skeptical about those numbers. I'm not a full-on conspiracy theorist when it comes to that. Like Query's convinced that they completely cooked the books, that there's no way like 800,000 people were in Nashville, Tennessee, all going to the NFL draft. And I'm kind of with him. 800,000 people is an insane amount of people. But I do think that, obviously this is a wildly popular event that people are going to come in from out of town to attend. And there is an economic impact that is associated with that, where people spend millions of dollars in your restaurants, in your bars, in your hotels, in your museums, the whole deal, to spend the time here to attend these events. So looking forward to I think it's got to happen, right? I mean, hell, you had an NFL draft in Cleveland and Detroit. How could you not have one in Indianapolis and Pittsburgh? I mean, they're just kind of making their way around the Midwest or the Midwestern adjacent cities. So I'm thinking Indy's got to be on that list. We come back, we will talk more IU and Purdue after that big win and big loss for the Hoosiers and Boilers last night, and what it means going forward. It's The Ride with JMV. Derek Schultz filling in. Stick around here on The Fan.
The Ride with JMV.
It's called Sex Panther by Odeon. It's illegal in 9 countries.
It's quite pungent. It stings the nostrils.
93.5 and 107.5. The Fan.
Rolling right along, Wednesday edition of The Ride with JMV, 93.5, 107.5, The Fan. Thanks to James Adams, as always. I'm Derek Schultz, filling in for John, as I do, God, I don't know, 3 times a year, 4 times a year. I fill in sometimes on Jake's show as well. It's fun. It's great to get the chance to do this and hop back on here. I say this every time. I'm not trying to go down memory lane or anything, but I say this every time where I did this for a long time, where I did an afternoon show on a different station and I did a midday show, and this was my life for a long time. And then right before COVID, Jake and I, Jake Query, who's now the midday host here, got let go, national layoffs and all of that, and it sucked. It was right around this time 6 years ago, and I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do with my life? Everything is ending, and I'm not going to be an AM radio show co-host anymore, and my life is over, and my family hates me, and my parents are disappointed, and the whole deal. I was in my feelings, and here we are 6 years later, and I still kind of get to scratch this itch every once in a while, which is nice, and it's not something that I take for granted. And I've moved on to other things and have a new job and all of that, which I'm very happy with. But I do sometimes, it is nice to go down memory lane and get the opportunity to do this. So thanks to everybody here at the Fan for letting me in here. Thanks to Jake for letting me in the studio. If he really put his foot down about it. If he wasn't my best friend, then he would be really angry about that. This just shows, it reveals Jake's true feelings for me. Indiana and Purdue do not have those sort of feelings for each other. What a month IU fans are having, by the way. My God. It continued last night with the Hoosiers' 72-67 win over Purdue, which now gives them a quality win, IU that is, for the first time this season, and really enhances their NCAA tournament at large resume. Whereas for Purdue, after a 17-1 start, this thing has started to hit the skids a little bit. They gave one away at UCLA. They had a 6-point lead with 90 seconds left and fumbled it away. Against Illinois, they were great offensively. 82 points and 3 turnovers for the entire game. You're at home. You should win that game. And they didn't, because Illinois had them just in a blender defensively. And then you had Keaton Wagler just go off 46 points in a college basketball game, which is an insane number. And then, even last night, if they were able to just find a way to beat what is a pretty ordinary Indiana team, they could have gotten themselves right back on track. And instead, some of those same gremlins popped up. But I think unlike the UCLA and Illinois game, there were some red flags with just how they played. And I think Matt Painter kind of alluded to that in the post-game press conference, where, he's sitting there and yes, a team is a work in progress always, regardless if you have, if you got 12 seniors on the roster, it's the same thing. But some of this is just going to have to be improvement that comes from within, because you have so much experience on this squad with the guys, not only the guys that have played together with Kaufman, Wren, and Braden Smith and Lawyer, but also, some of the other guys that have been around college basketball for a long time, like Oscar Clough. It should be better than this, than what they've been for the past 10 days. And 10 days is what it is. 10 days is not the entire season. There's a lot of basketball left to be played. But for a team that was preseason number 1, you're the 5th best team in the Big Ten right now. And that's not going to cut it. That's not going to fly. Whereas if Indiana just makes the NCAA tournament and they're in the 7-10 game, hey, great, wonderful. That'd be awesome. You're approaching this from different baselines. Indiana moved on from their coach, brought in a new guy, brought in an entirely new team. They have a starting point of where they were starting from. What were they even picked? 9th in the Big Ten, 10th? I don't remember. Somewhere in the back there, in the middle there. And then here's Purdue. You bring back Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer and Trey Kaufman-Wren, who have played 100-something games together. You add Clough in the portal and Omer Meyer in the portal as well, who's a highly regarded pro-Israeli basketball player overseas. And you bring back Jakari Harris and you bring back C.J. Cox, who gave you good minutes last year as well. and Daniel Jacobson, who they're still high on, even though he only played 2 games last year, your preseason number 1, you're expected to be, here, way farther along than that. You're expected to be a Final Four team. You're supposed to be a national title contender. And so 3-game losing skids for those teams, you could say what you want about, Purdue fans are panicking and they're waiting for the other shoe to drop and they're always, this is how they operate. Yeah, like there's a mentality there that's deeply rooted in Purdue fandom where you just wait for the disaster to happen. And maybe this is the disaster happening. But if Purdue goes through this season and they finish 5th in the Big Ten and they lose in the Sweet 16, the season's a failure. Whereas with Indiana, the Sweet 16 has essentially been the high water mark for the better part of the last 30 years. They make the Sweet 16, and it's a huge success. So it's just a difference there. I think Indiana fans can feel very good about where their team is right now as they're trying to build this thing back up after 10 years of just being stuck. But Purdue is supposed to be ready-made, right? They're supposed to contend right now. They're not supposed to have these warts. They're not supposed to have these setbacks, and they're having them. So we'll see if they can turn it around. I mean, maybe Indiana's found something here with Nick Dorn as well in the starting lineup. I mean, he was fantastic last night, and he's been great over the last 3 games. And Tucker DeVries, they're not devoid of talent. It's weird because, we're in this place in college basketball and even in college football where you're just kind of cobbling things together at the last second. They very much just sort of threw this team together because they had to. But I think Darren DeVries, for the most part, has done a really admirable job of making this work. Like it's a competent, decent basketball team. It is. They're pretty good. I mean, when they play well, they can be really good. And that's more than you can say for essentially all of the Archie Miller teams and some of the late Mike Woodson teams. God, it was such a chore to watch IU the last 2 years. I felt like I was hate watching them. I'd tune in, I'd be like, okay, hit play on the stream, and you're like, ugh. You sit through 2 hours of blech. And now, they're making shots. When they're making them, they're fun to watch. When Wilkerson's raining threes and Dorn's coming through and, all of that, it's fun to watch. And it's tough for Purdue. I mean, the program is in a great spot where you can feel like at 17-4, you're failing, right? Like that actually, if you step back and look, Matt Painter has them in such a good spot to feel that way. But there's just this immense amount of pressure that comes with that, where it's hard to enjoy the journey when you're so laser focused on the result. And especially in the wake of an IU football championship and all of that, I think, we talk about sense of urgency that the Irsay family likes to throw around. I think, Purdue fans are feeling that sense of urgency of, okay, this season has to materialize into something, and they don't want to see it dissolve away. I'm still confident it's Matt Painter, right? It's Braden Smith. I mean, I don't think those guys are going to let it fade into the night here. But just with the way college basketball is set up this year, the league is so good at the top. And Nebraska and Michigan State and Illinois. And then you got Arizona and UConn and Iowa State. I mean, it is just, you've got like 12, 14, 15 teams that can realistically win the whole thing and are good enough to be like a 1 seed or at least a 2 seed in like any other year. It's just so loaded at the top that it just makes you feel like, maybe this isn't in the cards. And I don't want to default to that Purdue fan sort of depression of, kind of Eeyore of Winnie the Pooh. We're just like, okay, gonna fail again. Like, I don't want to get into that mindset. Like, I still want to be confident about them because they've got everything still in front of them. But it's tough. These last 10 days, I think, have zapped a lot of that. And, they're going to have to bounce back and find a way to make this thing work and really kind of go on a run here. Certainly if they're going to contend for the Big Ten title, I mean, the margin for error is beyond 0 now. I mean, they essentially, they might have to win out to win the Big Ten. And you might have to get to 16-4. Honestly, that might be the mark. I don't know if 15-5 is going to do it. And even at this point, I don't know if Purdue can go 15-5 the rest of the way, not playing like they've had the past 2 weeks or so. And we'll see with Indiana. Again, like a NCAA tournament, and you get in, and that's a great first step for Darren DeVries, and then he's going to have to essentially kind of do this whole thing again, right? Where a lot of these guys won't be back next year, and you kind of remake the team all over again. but he seems to be like a guy that is in control of that and knows what he's doing, building in the right direction. Thanks to Galen Clavio, Crimson Cast, for joining us. Patrick Talty, the president of Indiana Sports Corps, as well as Kevin Bowen, you're going to hear from coming up here in just a little bit as we talk to him about his trip up to Notre Dame with Greg Rakestraw, and also a little bit about the Colts offseason. A lot of question marks when it comes to wide receiver and what's going to happen with Alec Pierce, what's going to happen with Michael Pittman Jr. as well. And Kevin is going to talk about those things while also talking about what the Patriots and Seahawks Super Bowl means for the Colts, as far as whether that's an indictment or not on where the Colts currently sit. It's The Ride with JMV. Derek Schultz filling in here, 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
With JMV.
Give me my theme music!
93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
Joining us now, a fellow Midtowner. He is the host of the Fan Morning Show and the biggest Colts expert around. He's Kevin Bowen, who joins us now. And Kevin, does that back up your experience as far as the roads are concerned? I mean, I thought, again, with the caveat of it's not saying much, I did think that they did a better job than normal.
Yes, I could not agree more on that. I would echo these side streets. Yeah, it's like, you're watching Santa Claus in the flesh all of a sudden as the plow is going down some of the side streets. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, outside of the temperatures and the snow melting, I feel like that's like the biggest issue now.
I think it's really awesome that you and Rake braved the snowy roads to make the buddy trip up to South Bend, and you've done that now, 3 or 4 seasons in a row. I'm sorry for your Irish and for the OT loss. Did you end up sticking around for the whole thing?
Yeah, we did. I'd love to give Rake truth serum and see if he really was all about staying for both of those overtimes there. I know I kind of sheepishly looked at him. Probably more after the first overtime than the second overtime, and thought to myself, hey, do you want to stay here? Because, a midnight rearrival back to Indianapolis turned into 1 a.m., and I literally think we walked out of the arena and IU Purdue was already over with the first half. I think we were thinking, hey, we eat up the whole drive home by listening to Rob Blackman, Don Fisher, et cetera. So, yes, we did stay. Quite excruciating. I hope Rake was fully rested for a 7 a.m. Tennis here on this Wednesday morning, but unbelievable trooper that he is. He was all about it, and it was quite the entertaining game.
Man, so you both had early starts today. Well, that's good for you guys to soldier through it. Before we get into some Colts-related news, because even though it's late January and this is sort of the time of year where it's deader than dead on that front, I guess Bill Belichick is sort of Colts-related news. So what was your reaction to him getting stiffed on the Hall of Fame first ballot?
I mean, at first I was, honestly, Rick and I were having a pregame drink, look up at the TV. I'm like, am I reading that correctly? Like, is that what that's saying? Like, if you just live in a black and white world of, Bill Belichick, Hall of Famer, obviously the answer is yes, emphatically. I actually have had a decent amount of people push back. I'm sure in our market it makes sense of like, hey, why aren't you factoring in any of the cheating? And I guess when you look at the punishment, I get it was severe from a team standpoint, but it never got to the point of outright suspension. And, part of me thinks that is something you decide before you get to this part of the Hall of Fame process. When this whole process starts and you start to cut down to the respective, semifinalists, finalists, et cetera, if a player is deemed uncut due to, suspensions or off the field issues, then, they don't show up on the ballot. That's kind of how I view it. And I just think in general we have issues with voting for awards. And I honestly, and again, it's not apples to apples. I'm not acting like it is, but I go back to our Mr. Football Award this year. I mean, we had a kid in, Miles McLaughlin set a national single-season high school record. National single-season high school record. How long have they been playing high school football in the U.S.? And he sets a national record, and he gets 60% of the vote. And it just seems like everybody has some sort of whether it's a small school agenda or, he gets the ball too much. Everybody has this own little personal agenda with it, and I would be stunned if some of that wasn't involved in the Belichick vote. And I'm not this believer of if you've waited your turn, you deserve to be higher up in the line than others. And I think honestly that happened with some of this voting, whether it was Ken Anderson or, Robert Kraft's CBA involvement. To me, it's not Derek Schultz and James are in line at Holiday World. It's no, if Fernando Mendoza shows up to Splash and Safari, you're probably going to move out of the way. That's just kind of how it is. And I think Bill Belichick has a resume. Maybe I should be paying attention more to it and have the sanctity of the first ballot, but I just don't really have it.
I would not let Tom Brady cut James and I in line at Holiday World, just for the record there, Kevin. No, but I think what you said is right, and it's not, we're making this about the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I think you'd say this about the Baseball Hall of Fame, too. It's just, I think people are just getting in their feelings about it, and look, I don't have a vote for it, you don't have a vote for it, but if I did, I wouldn't be putting myself above the hall, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? I just think people are, getting in their feelings or their personal agendas when it comes to this. And really it should just be, ultimately it's one of those things that really you can just judge on paper, can't you? And just be look, 8 championships. Okay, next.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And again, maybe I don't know, maybe I should have more value in, hey, first balloters for the elite and the clean. And, I'm not condoning by any means what he did, but I just feel like that's more of a, hey, if you're on the ballot, then it is a show me the results, show me the resume, show me what you just said, the 8 Super Bowls, and everything else that goes with his resume there. And again, maybe in our market, like we're getting a little bit more pushback just because we're naturally the villain or probably the one that, saw the biggest, there should be more on Napoleon's resume or Dungy's resume or Manning's resume, but I don't know. It just seems like a slippery slope. Like, are we not going to put Brady in first ballot because of this? Like, I mean, where are we going on this, and how far are you going on this?
We're talking with Kevin Bowen, host of the Fan Morning Show on the Andy Moore Group Automotive Hotline here on the Ride. Speaking of Hall of Fames, I get that it's different for the players than it is for this like senior pool. Reggie Wayne is still in there, and he's been in there for a long time. And I think folks have long thought that Reggie Wayne, at least here, was eventually going to get in, but. Are you concerned at all, Kevin, that the national support is going to be tough as he continues to wait? Because I'm looking at this class right now, and I don't see the window cracking for Reggie Wayne in 2026.
No, and honestly, Derek, I'm a little worried about just tagging on a few more years to that. I don't. For example, this year, Larry Fitzgerald will be a first balloter. I assume Drew Brees. I think it'll be a very small class again. I mean, those are no doubters, and we'll see about Adam Vinatieri. He didn't get in, which I didn't agree with last year. And, for those that haven't followed it, the Hall of Fame voting did change their process here in the last year or so. They wanted it to be more of a selective Hall of Fame. So basically, from what I understand, 50 voters, you can only vote for 3, and it has to be an 80% vote. So, again, unless you're the no-doubters, these classes are not going to be the 5-man classes that I think we were used to. When Dungy and Harrison both went in, they went in a 5-man class. That's no longer the case. And, when you think about whiteout too, for example, I want to say it's Andre Reed got in over Marvin.
Yeah.
Marvin had to wait 3 years. And that was kind of going back to the whole line thing of like, well, that guy's waited his turn. It's like, well, no, like when people show up that have the resume that's better than the people that have waited, that's how the Hall of Fame works. Those guys should go in my opinion, sooner, earlier. And so I, from what I've gathered and, talking with Mike Chappell, it just doesn't seem like Reggie is held in very high regard. And the postseason resume of him, ranking really high up there in catches and yards, it doesn't seem like that is really a whole lot of stock. So, I used to thought it'd be eventually the no-brainer. Freeney would get in, and Vinatieri, of course, and Wayne. And, I even held a little bit of hope for Mathis, just leading the NFL history in forced fumbles and sacks and that stat. But I think right now Vinatieri will at some point, but I don't know about Reggie, man.
Yeah, and it's a bummer because I think we would all agree that when you take probably Peyton out of the equation, if you talk about most popular Colts, he would be way up there. I know some folks who that he's their number one, even in front of Peyton and in front of anybody that's ever played. Speaking of, while we're on the topic of receivers, let's talk about, I think the current receiver room is a really interesting offseason. I don't want to say issue because that makes it sound like the Colts are in a bad spot. I don't think they're in a bad spot at all, but I think they are going to have to make some decisions, notably on what's going to happen here with Alec Pierce. Kevin, I'm under the assumption that, especially with the quote-unquote sense of urgency that they're going to do everything that they can to keep him from hitting the market. But if that's the case, what do you think that price tag or ballpark is going to be for retaining Alec Pierce?
Yeah, I think it's going to be high. I think it'll shock some people, and some people will probably be turned off by it when they see that initial number. But, that to me is kind of what Alec Pierce has earned because he has the special trait, in a league that is just desperately defensive trying to take away big plays. So we can't allow him, 2 deep safeties, all of that. Pierce has shown the ability time and time again, no matter who the quarterback is, to still consistently produce those plays. And we don't even factor in how many pass interference penalties he draws on a pretty routine basis. So, the franchise tag number is $28 million, I believe, for a wideout. I would have, no issue in that. Because, again, if you're going to weigh like him and Michael Pittman Jr., and I think we're starting to do this, Pittman Jr.'s got 1 more year left. His cap hit is $29 million. Pierce is a free agent. First off, Pierce, 3 or 4 years younger. Secondly, who is easier to replace? Who has the trait that's harder to find? And I would argue it's Pierce. So, for me, it's not that big of a debate, albeit that price tag is going to be very, very high.
I think we know that they're not going to bring back Michael Pittman Jr. on a $29 million cap hit. Like that's not going to happen. But does that mean that he's playing somewhere else, or do you think there's a scenario where they go back to the negotiation table as far as kind of maybe restructuring some of that to see if they can keep him around?
Yeah, I think you have to, and I think Pittman almost was resigned to that fact at the end of the season. I think he understands where he is at within this receiver room, especially with Pierce stepping up a little bit here. Now, I don't think you just let Pittman walk. I mean, I love Ashton Dulin as much as anybody else, but I don't know if he's, a 60-snap guy. And this is where the A.D. Mitchell trade does come into play a little bit here. If you still had Mitchell and he had shown growth that maybe he did show with the Jets, then, maybe you would feel a little bit more comfortable about that. So, if you are to let Pittman walk, I think wide receiver now becomes somewhat of a need here this offseason. And again, I think every time I pretend like the NFL is not a business, I quickly get reminded, or it's like opening up the door right now and feeling the weather outside. So I don't want to act like Michael Pittman Jr. is just here to take some pay cut, but by all accounts, he's loved it here. He's got the farm. He's got multiple kids. Like, is there any sort of, hey, let's restructure, let's extend you for a year, and you're still going to make a pretty healthy penny, but maybe not at that $29 million cap hit. Now, again, having said that, when he signed the original deal a couple off seasons ago, he did what we saw Terry McLaurin do, back in August of, hey, I'm going to do the 3-year deal. The thought is I could still be in my prime and hit free agency one more time. Now, again, maybe a little bit of a catching up to Pittman, given his age and, hovering around 30 years old. But I think that was some of the thought process there. So I guess to answer it all, I would restructure, keep him here. But if you let him walk, then wide receiver now really, really skyrockets on the needs list.
And as you said, NFL is a business, but we've seen the man that is in charge of the personnel here, Chris Ballard, has been very loyal to his players, the guys that are perceived core players, and I think we would put Michael Pittman Jr. in that core. When we talk about last year, it was, okay, Chris Ballard was more aggressive in free agency, and we pushed him, and by we, I mean the ownership, the Irsay family, pushed him to be maybe more aggressive in free agency. Do they now, Kevin, have to push him to make some of these hard decisions when it comes to cuts? Like if it comes down to having to cut Michael Pittman Jr. or maybe even looking at Zaire Franklin and saying, yeah, you know what, we're moving on from this too, or any one of those number, the Colts have a couple of cut candidates on here to free up some money if they chose to go that way, but Ballard has very rarely chosen to seemingly go that way.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's one I kind of tossed his way a few weeks ago. Just, all right, this is out of the ordinary for you, but again, in the last 12 months, you have done some things differently, and he didn't commit to it. This time last year, he committed to the free agency thing pretty publicly. Hey, I do need to spend more, on the outside market. So, was that him just trying to, save face, and, he doesn't want to all of a sudden open that can of worms of us debating, Pittman here next year, Zaire Franklin here. I mean, you just went down the list. Kenny Moore II is a guy I'm like, okay, is he the ideal Lou Anarumo fit? I think you can get into debates about a lot of these guys. And depth at some of these positions I don't think are great to where it's as obvious as some others here. But, if you are going to make changes to your roster and keep Alec Pierce and Daniel Jones, I don't see how you can do it without a first-round pick, without restructuring some deals, at the very least. So I think that is going to have to be a part of it, or just outright cuts, to your point, which, again, outside of quarterback, I just cannot recall, and I'm sure I'm missing people, but I cannot recall many, if any, times in Ballard's, previous, 9 years that he has signed some player and then before the end of that contract, let that player walk or cut that player, of course. That is very, anti what he has done here. So I think it's necessary if you're going to accomplish some stuff. I mean, if you're going to go out and find a starting defensive end opposite Latu and, maybe retool some of your linebacker room, I think you have to. I don't see how the math adds up to where you don't do some of those things, because the thing about the lack of a first-round pick, there's been drafts where he has not had a first-round pick.
Yeah.
But, that has been by choice, where they've taken the first-round pick and they've traded back, and they've just added second-rounders. You think about the Pittman and Taylor draft, or, go back to the Quentin Nelson draft, when they traded back from 3 to 6, they added some second rounders. That's not the case. Like you traded your first rounder for Sauce Gardner, so you don't have that available to you like you have maybe in some prior years.
You can follow Kevin on X, Twitter at KBowen1070. Of course, mornings right here on The Fan. Always appreciate it, buddy. Keep up the great work in the morning drive as well.
You bet, Derek. Thanks for having me, man, and best to you and the family.
That's our friend Kevin Bowen.
5, The Fan.
Welcome back to The Ride with JMV, filling in for John. I'm Derek Schultz. Really appreciate you joining us here for a final time as we set the table and get you set to go for Pacers and Bulls coming up. I used to say a couple of blocks away, but I guess with this new location about a mile up the road, a little more than a couple of blocks away. It'd be a long walk on a chilly night like this to get from our Urban One headquarters on North Meridian and St. Joe all the way down to Gamebridge Fieldhouse. But should be a good atmosphere for Pacers and Bulls tonight. And that's something that's actually kind of struck me about the Pacers so far this year. And again, this is maybe subjective, and I'm just using my own personal experience to give you this take, which I guess is the case with any take that a person gives, right? It's just about what they think and what they've lived and what they've seen. But I've gone to 4 Pacers games this year. They've actually won 3 of them, which is pretty incredible. Maybe I should be attending more of them. And look, it's not the same as the Eastern Conference Finals last year. It's not the same as down the stretch last year at all, or really the last 2 years of the regular season games that I've gone to. As far as the ambiance and the vibe is concerned, it's different. It's more muted, right? Because I think everybody in the stands sort of understands what this season is for the Pacers and what they've been going through. That said, just from an attendance standpoint and from a cheering standpoint, a volume standpoint, a standpoint of if you were to drop in an NBA fan from a different city, from a team that's also struggling, like let's say that you dropped in a Wizards fan or a Hornets fan, or a team from a market that's just a team that's not relevant, right? And the Nets, like nobody cares about the Nets, right? If you were to drop in one of those fans into Gamebridge Fieldhouse, I don't know if that fan would be able to immediately identify that the Pacers are one of the 3 worst teams in the league. And I mean that as a compliment. Like, I still think the entertainment value and the investment of the people in the stands is still pretty high. It's not depressing. Like, I actually went to, and promise not to make fun of me for this, I went to a Washington Wizards basketball game this year. I paid real money, real American dollars, to go and attend a Washington Wizards basketball game. It was their second game of the year at home. I was on a work trip to D.C. for a convention. And I was like, I called up my old buddy, Sammy Agee. Some of you guys will remember. I mean, Sam was a producer, I think even for John way back in the day. And he lives in D.C. now. And I said, hey, he's an NBA nerd like me. You want to go watch some NBA basketball on a random Wednesday night? And he's like, sure. And we bought $10 seats to go see the Wizards play. And there was just sort of almost like this depression involved with sitting there. Like the fans weren't really into the game at all. The only people that were into the game were the Sixers fans that were a short drive away, that kind of made their voices heard because they were playing Philadelphia that night and the proximity between those two cities. But it was just sort of a sort of atmosphere. And it's also not like a minor league baseball atmosphere, which, no offense to like the Indians or some of the other minor league baseball teams, like people are more there to sit in the sun and grab a beer, grab a Sun King or whatever else and hang with their friends and eat a hot dog than actually be invested in what's happening in the game. I don't think either of those things with these Pacers games so far this season, even though we're talking about a team that's, what are they, like 10-40 or whatever they are. And I think that is a testament to this fan base and also Pacer sports and entertainment in general. I have always felt like of the bang for the buck when it comes to sports in Indianapolis, the Pacers and the NBA, and this is maybe a little bit biased to me because I'm an NBA guy at heart. I think it's the best. If you're asking me what would I prefer, Pacers tickets or Colts tickets, I'm taking Colts tickets 100 times out of, I'm taking Pacers tickets 100 times out of 100. I think it's more action-packed. I think there are less stoppages. I think even when they have stoppages, they have events and segments and whatever you call them that are engaging and not just the same thing over and over again. Like, I understand they've done Deal or No Deal for a while, but the Colts have kind of been like, hey, here's Blue tossing the T-shirt into the can. All right. And you're just kind of like, all right. Like, I've been watching this for 15 years, man. Like, okay, I'm ready to kind of move on to the next thing. And, the soundtrack, I think the music is a little more up to date, a little bit better. Even though I went to a Colts game this year, and I felt like they've gotten a little bit better on the soundtrack. But overall, I just think it's a better vibe. I think it's a better time than what you get with the Colts game. And I even say that when the Colts are at least competent or contending. Contending is the wrong word. Contending for maybe a playoff spot compared to the Pacers, which are this year down in the doldrums. So I didn't mean to get off on a rant about that because I wanted to plug the broadcast. We do. If you don't want to go to the game tonight or you don't have tickets, you can still, of course, listen to the Pacers and Bulls right here on the Fan. But if you want to still take the kids downtown and see have a really entertaining 2.5 quarters, even with a Pacers team that is clearly struggling, I vouch for it. I think it is worth it. I think the Pacers have been a good entertainment value so far this year, and they remain so. And God, what a beautiful building. I'm kind of like Jake Query. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with public money going to enhance sports venues and help billionaire owners. It's just, no offense to the Simons and to the Irsay family, who have both done a lot for this city, but it just, that whole arrangement, that relationship makes me uncomfortable when I'm just trying to get my side street plowed, But that said, Gamebridge Fieldhouse and the renovations and the enhancements that they've made there, man, it is... it's a palace. I have not been to more than probably a half dozen NBA venues, but I would guess that it is among the very, very best, among the very top NBA venues. I can tell you it's a lot better than Capital One Arena. When I went to see the Wizards play that depressed ball back in October when I was in town there. But Gamebridge Fieldhouse is a great place to play. But yeah, Pacers and Bulls coming up here in just a little bit. Thanks to our tremendous guests today, Patrick Talty, Indiana Sports Corps, of course, Kevin Bowen here in-house. He's obligated to come on the show, but we still appreciate him taking the time, especially after that tough road trip up to South Bend to see his Irish lose in overtime. And the great Galen Clavio. If you're an IU fan and you're not listening to Crimson Cast, you're crazy. You got to be doing it. Him and Scott do a fantastic job. They've been doing it for a long time, and I was happy for those two to see IU football come through, because those two guys were true blue, or I guess true crimson and cream IU football fans through and through, and boy, did they have a fun time, I'm sure, as all IU fans did during that journey to the national title game. Thanks to James Adams as well, doing a great job. John returns tomorrow. Until next time, I'm Derek Schultz. I hope you enjoyed it. This has been The Ride with JMV on the Fan. Pacers Bulls pregame coverage next.